Chapter 125. Winter in the Qinling Mountains was very dark. It was clearly noon, but the visibility in the mountains was never more than 200 or 300 meters. The fog was thick and the snow was white. This small village hidden in the valley was as quiet and peaceful as ever. Outside the solemn ancestral hall, the huge bronze cauldron had been carefully cleaned. The accumulated snow on top of the cauldron had also been cleared away, revealing the thick and dignified aura of a bronze artifact that had been buried in snow for a long time. The originally empty square was now filled with countless ritual tools and props. Great-granduncle's body was nowhere to be found. According to the tradition of the village, after setting up a cenotaph for him, he still needed to be held in the square outside the ancestral hall for 7 days and 7 days before the burial ceremony could be held. The main character of this funeral was only great-granduncle. Third uncle was on the verge of death, but he was lucky enough to survive. Third uncle would probably secretly rejoice when he woke up. Zhao Xinghuai and Li Hoan hid in the house and drank to drown their sorrows. The sweet and bitter taste entered their throats, but the two of them wanted to get drunk. However, their cultivation was so high that even getting drunk had become an extravagant hope. Although several days had passed, the appearance of that young man seemed to be becoming clearer in their minds. Zhao Xinghuai and Li Hoan were the same age, and 2 years older than Qin Yongyan. The village was not a sect, nor was it a family clan. This was an ordinary village with a few hundred families living in it. Of course, this village had its own special characteristics: the 100 schools of Qi men and the 6 paths of miscellaneous studies. Each family might have a different inheritance. Zhao Xinghuai, Li Hoan, and Qin Yongyan all learned martial arts, so they had been very playful since they were young. As the backbone of the village, Zhao Xinghuai and Li Hoan had always had their own pride. Third uncle was their role model. Great-granduncle was their dream. But now everything had been shattered. Until that day they finally understood what was power. That was absolute power, and also a power that made people despair. Everyone was frightened. Even though the great-granduncle, who was the most senior, the strongest, and the most respected person in the village, died on the spot, no one dared to stand out and say that they would avenge him. The elders were silent. After great-granduncle died, the 7 elders didn't even dare to show their faces. They just let that man swagger away. Old Qin was incredible. She gave birth to a good daughter, and her daughter found a good son-in-law. Who would have thought that, after competing with Qin Yongyan for most of their lives, they would lose in this aspect? The more Zhao Xinghuai thought about it, the more frustrated he felt. He picked up the earthen jug and drank from it. Li Hoan was stunned for a moment. Then he raised the earthen jar and clinked it with him. It was still snowing outside. After drinking this jar of wine, they had to go out and clear the snow to prevent the bronze cauldrons and magic tools in the square from being buried by the snow. After all, it was the great-granduncle's sacrificial offering. They couldn't be too shabby. Both of them were grandmasters of the dance stage, so after drinking, they casually put on a thin layer of clothing and walked out of the door. Then they took a broom and swept the snow on the ground. It was obviously noon, but because the fog blocked the sun, the whole sky looked very gloomy, as dreary as before a rainstorm. The gloomy weather made people feel even more gloomy. Bah! This damn weather! Zhao Xinghuai cursed bitterly as he swept the snow with a broom. Suddenly, he seemed to feel something, so he quickly looked up at the sky. He saw that, in the foggy sky, there suddenly appeared a faintly discernible black spot. The black spot was getting bigger and bigger. Zhao Xinghuai couldn't help but straighten his body, looking up to see it more clearly. Old Li, look! Their eyesight was far better than ordinary people, so Li Hoan immediately found that very small black spot. It seemed to be a person. In just a breath's time, that black shadow had already flown directly above their heads. At this time, the two finally saw the figure clearly. It was him. Even if this young man turned into ashes, he would be able to recognize him at a glance. Zhao Xinghuai was shocked. Almost without thinking, he raised the broom and put on a defensive posture. However, the young man flying in the sky didn't seem to see them at all. They didn't see him do anything, but a long sword suddenly appeared in his hand. Oh no! As soon as he saw the sword, Zhao Xinghuai panicked. But before he shouted, he saw the young man gently slashing the sword at the ancestral hall below. A sword gleam with golden light shot out. As the sword gleam flew toward the ancestral hall, it slowly became bigger. At first, it looked like an ordinary long sword. In the blink of an eye, it had become dozens of times bigger. When it was about to reach the ancestral hall, the sword gleam seemed to have become a high-speed train, directly hitting the middle of the ancestral hall's door. Boom! The ancestral hall's door exploded with a loud bang, immediately setting off thousands of violent turbulence. The wooden door was swept by the violent turbulence, instantly smashed into countless pieces. However, it wasn't over yet. After hitting the ancestral hall's door, the sword gleam didn't stop. Like a train that didn't stop, the sword gleam passed through the front yard, crushed the main hall, and only stopped when it hit the hillside behind the ancestral hall. This young man's casual swing of the sword actually cut the ancestral hall in half. The sword gleam disappeared. The violent turbulence that it set off became even more violent. Zhao Xinghuai stood in the square, holding his dantian and crossing his arms in front of him. The violent flying sand and gravel kept hitting his body, causing his skin and flesh to hurt. If he continued to resist like this, he might suffer unnecessary injuries. So Zhao Xinghuai thought for a while, and had no choice but to put down his pride as a grandmaster. He suddenly lay on the ground, then covered his head with both hands, and prayed that the storm would soon subside. After a long time, the turbulence finally calmed down, and the smoke and dust dissipated. The solemn ancestral hall had been split into two, as if the middle part had been forcefully removed. It was a scene of broken walls and ruins. Zhao Xinghuai lay on the ground. After feeling that the storm had subsided, he secretly raised his head to look at the situation. Li Hoan lay not far away from him. The open space around the square was full of broken wood and gravel, and the ancestral hall was also split in half. He hesitated for a moment, then raised his head to look at the sky. That young man holding a long sword, he looked like a god descending from the heavens, looking down on all living beings with an expressionless face. He gently landed not far in front of Zhao Xinghuai. Then, his voice slowly reached Zhao Xinghuai's ears. "I don't want to kill for no reason. So I want to ask you to tell me, Xian Nu's ghost? Where is it?" These words were not directed at Zhao Xinghuai alone. His voice was very soft, but it rang in every corner of the village at the same time. The tranquility of the village was broken. Countless people came out of their rooms and rushed toward the square. Looking from the sky, it was like a piece of white paper suddenly appeared with many ants. The crowd was crowded, but no one dared to approach the square. Chun Shi held a long sword, silently looking at the ancestral hall in front of him. Suddenly, a group of old men came out from the ruins of the ancestral hall. There were a total of 7 of them, all wearing white training clothes, and they were of different sizes. The leader was holding the dragon-headed walking stick of great-granduncle that day. He probably took over great-granduncle's position after his death. The 7 old men stood on the steps, looking at Chun Shi from afar. After hesitating for a moment, the leader of the old men sighed softly. "You are already a heavenly being at such a young age. Why do you have to force us old bones?" Hearing this, Chun Shi could not help but sneer. "Hand over the Xianin soul, and I promise not to hurt anyone." As his voice fell, the leader of the old men fell silent. The few old men beside him could not help but have a slight change in expression. Immediately after, they silently communicated with their eyes. This ancient village hid many secrets. For example, Xian Nu's ghost was actually the key to opening the Divine Gate. The Divine Gate had not appeared for more than 100 years, and Xian Nu had been replaced by batches. It was not until this batch that they finally received a heavenly warning, confirming that the Divine Gate was about to open. This was also their last chance. Several old men looked at Chun Shi at the bottom of the steps, silently communicating. Chapter 126. The wind and snow continued. The elders did not speak. They were communicating with their eyes. Perhaps it was their unique tacit understanding. Chun-Shi did not understand, nor did he bother to guess. He stood in the square with his sword in hand, quietly waiting for their reply. More and more people gathered around, but no one dared to approach the square. Zhao Xinghuai and Li Hoan had already retreated to the small house where they were drinking. The cold wind whistled past, and the square was a scene of desolation. After about 2 minutes, the elder with the dragon-headed cane finally turned his head and glanced at Chun-Shi. But then he shifted his gaze away. The expression on his face was very complicated, as if he was still struggling with something. In fact, on the day when Chun-Shi took away Qin Ruoying, they had already discussed it. At that time, they chose to compromise. But what they did not expect was that Chun-Shi would actually come back and want to take back Xian Nu's ghost. Everyone handed the right to make the decision to him, which put a lot of pressure on him. After looking at the elders again, seeing that they all nodded at him, the elder frowned and finally made the final decision. "We agree to your request." Hearing this, Chun-Shi could not help but nod, very satisfied with his answer. The elder slowly walked down the stairs with the dragon-headed cane, then went straight to the giant bronze cauldron. "The ghosts of Xian Nu have been sealed in this giant cauldron for generations. I will now release them." After explaining to Chun-Shi, the elder suddenly jumped up and inserted the dragon-headed cane in his hand into the giant bronze cauldron. Ka! The sound of metal colliding was suddenly heard. Immediately after, a golden light suddenly emerged from the giant bronze cauldron. The golden light was as small as the light from a laser pointer at first. But in the blink of an eye, the light had become as thick as a bucket. The golden light burst into the sky. A crack was instantly torn in the gloomy sky. The clouds in the sky churned. As if affected by something, with the golden light as the center, a huge cloud vortex gradually condensed in the clouds. What was even stranger was that the cloud vortex was rotating at a speed visible to the naked eye. The old man standing beside the giant cauldron became excited when he saw the scene in front of him. Suddenly, a faint fluorescent golden barrier appeared above the village, instantly enveloping the entire valley. Then, a strong vibration came from the ground, as if there was an earthquake. Immediately afterward, a golden light pillar as thick as a bucket rose from the 4 corners of the valley. These 5 pillars of light seemed to be the pillars of the barrier. When the light pillars rose from the 4 corners, the barrier in the sky became even more dazzling. The barrier was like a golden tortoise shell, encircling the valley where the village was located. The wind and snow that filled the sky suddenly stopped. The sun broke through the clouds. Almost instantly, everyone felt their eyes light up, and their vision widened a lot. Formation array? Seeing this, Chun-Shi couldn't help but frown. He still remembered that there was a stone tablet at the entrance of the village, with the word Fong Xiuan written on it. So he turned his head to look at the entrance of the village, only to find that the stone tablet was located at the place where the light pillar rose. He originally thought that this village only had a simple concealment formation, but after it was activated, Chun-Shi found that this formation array was no small matter. There were only a few functions of the formation array: trapping, killing, illusory, and some non-offensive auxiliary formations, such as breath concealment and spirit gathering. This formation array was arranged according to the terrain of the dragon vein, and could be said to be very expensive. After the 5 light pillars rose, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the entire formation suddenly swept over like a tide, wave after wave. Chun-Shi hadn't felt this surging spiritual energy of heaven and earth for a long time. But it was a little strange. With the conditions of the earth, even if it was a spirit-seizing formation set up by a Dongshu stage cultivator, it was impossible to set off such a strong spiritual energy tide in such a short time. Chun-Shi thought for a while. Then he suddenly understood. The formation in front of him was not a spirit-seizing formation, but a composite formation with both spirit gathering and spirit binding functions at the same time. The formation used the valley as the base, the 4 stone tablets in the 4 directions as the formation door, the giant bronze cauldron in the center of the square as the formation eye, and the valley terrain as the formation pattern. After the formation was set up, it would continuously seize the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from the Qinling Mountains, and then bind the spiritual energy within the formation. To seize such a large amount of spiritual energy of heaven and earth from the earth, this formation array was set up at least 500 years ago. The spirit-binding formation was a one-time use formation. After it was activated, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth accumulated over the years would burst out at once. In the heavenly jade world, cultivators above the golden core stage would usually set up a spirit-binding formation in their cave abodes, in case of emergency. This was like rain from the sky. So, she hurriedly sat cross-legged on the ground, taking advantage of the surging spiritual energy tide, and began to cultivate crazily. The opportunity couldn't be missed, so she didn't want to investigate why the old man suddenly activated this one-time auxiliary formation array. However, not long after he sat down cross-legged, the 4 light pillars in the north, south, east, and west suddenly turned into rainbows, like a rainbow bridge, and suddenly connected with the main light pillar above the giant bronze cauldron. The 5 light pillars suddenly gathered together, and the main light pillar immediately became very thick. Just by looking at its diameter, it was almost the same as the giant bronze cauldron. At this moment, the old man standing below the giant cauldron's face suddenly changed, and a burst of ecstasy appeared on his face. Then, he suddenly knelt on the ground and shouted respectfully, "Welcome, Divine General." Before he finished speaking, a figure walked out of the light pillar. It was a burly man who was almost 2 meters tall. His upper body was bare, revealing his strong muscles. The man called Divine General was floating in midair. After slowly scanning the surroundings, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Heaven's opening line. You only have the time of an incense stick. Speak." The old man knelt on the ground and looked up at the Divine General in the sky very sincerely. It seemed that he was so excited that his lips moved for a long time, but he didn't say a word. The elder ancestor's words were true. At this moment, she suddenly opened his eyes. He looked at the man flying in the sky, then looked at the old man kneeling on the ground. Then, Shi's lips suddenly curled into a faint sneer. "I thought you were really going to return Nu's spirit to me. I didn't expect that you just wanted to ask for help. Forget it. Since you don't want to give it to me, I'll find it myself." As he said that, he slowly stood up from the ground. After hearing Shi's words, the Divine General lowered his head and noticed him. One was in the sky, one was on the ground. Chapter 127. The spirit-binding array that had existed for hundreds of years was suddenly activated. Wave after wave of heaven and earth spirit chi surged, giving Shi an illusion. It was as if he had returned to the Tianxian domain. The surging heaven and earth spirit chi created an extremely comfortable environment for him, so comfortable that all the pores on his body could not help but open up naturally. He really needed the nourishment of heaven and earth spirit chi. Now, every breath he took was a great pleasure for Shi. The spirit chi surged, and the golden light soared into the sky. When the so-called Divine General walked out of the pillar of light, Shi finally understood the meaning of the existence of this array. This spirit-binding array was actually the last trump card of the village. The Divine General of the Elysium. The accumulation of hundreds of years of the array was only in exchange for the time it took for the Divine General to appear. When Shi killed great-granduncle and took Qin Ruoying away, they did not activate the array. Now that he came back to ask for the ghost, these old guys finally chose to activate the array and tried to fight to the death with Shi. It could be seen that Nu's ghost was more important to them than their own lives. Shi looked up at the burly man flying in the sky. A long sword of frost suddenly appeared in his hand. The old guys at least had the chance to struggle and hesitate, but he did not, because he was faced with only one choice: take back Yingying's ghost. Otherwise, when Qin Ruoying gradually grew old in his arms, Shi would also fall into endless pain and regret. He could not accept the arrival of that day. Therefore, then let's fight. If they were not willing to give, then let's fight. Shi was determined to kill, and the long sword of frost immediately glowed faintly. Then, under the slightly surprised gaze of the Divine General, he suddenly waved the long sword in his hand. The tip of the sword went from bottom to top, drawing an arc in the air. A sword radiance suddenly flew out. Seeing that Chun-Shi dared to suddenly attack him, the divine general's eyes flashed with surprise. The sword radiance came menacingly, and in an instant, it was in front of him. He did not seem to move, but a ball of blazing flames suddenly sprang up around the divine general. A barrier of stellar energy that seemed to be made of flames instantly formed. Bang! The sword radiance slammed into the flame barrier, like a typhoon erupting, and a storm of chi soared into the sky. But right after that, the flame barrier suddenly expanded. Then, a huge fireball with a diameter of more than 10 meters appeared in the air. Interesting. Accompanied by a burst of laughter, the divine general's figure suddenly flew out of the fireball. He suddenly stretched out his right hand and formed a claw with his 5 fingers. He clawed at the air and a golden fireball appeared in his palm. After the golden fireball appeared, the divine general's body seemed to be on fire. Golden flames kept jumping around him. Like the sun rising from the east, the golden fireball instantly ignited all the air within a radius of dozens of meters. The sun hung in the sky, the fire burning the sky. Chun-Shi stared intently at the tall and sturdy man in the sky, a trace of excitement rising in her heart. This move made him feel a hint of danger. The divine general seemed to be holding the sun in his hand, his body burning with raging flames. Like a meteor falling from the sky, he cut across the sky and smashed viciously toward Chun-Shi, who was standing on the ground. At this critical moment, Chun-Shi swung the sword in his hand, and in an instant, tens of thousands of sword radiances appeared. Countless long swords made of frost and snow appeared around him. They floated in the air, quietly waiting for orders. Chun-Shi pointed his sword to the sky, and the floating swords immediately turned their tips and aimed at the fireball in the sky. The third move of the moonlight sword technique. 10,000 swords returned to the sect. The densely packed long swords of frost and snow instantly converged into a long river of sword radiances, like the Milky Way flowing in reverse, and collided with the fireball in midair. The entire sky was instantly divided into 2 worlds. On one side of the divine general of the stellar of time, flames and snakes of fire danced in the sky. It was as if one was above the sun, the crown flow feathers shining brightly. On the other side of Chun-Shi, wind and clouds surged, snow and ice splattered everywhere, as if one was caught in the most violent snowstorm of the North Pole. The 2 of them seemed to be separated by an invisible and boundless glass wall. In one world, there were 2 kinds of wonders. It was truly amazing. Boom! The moment the sword radiances met the fireball, it was as if a nuclear bomb had exploded. A strong shockwave suddenly erupted, and the old man closest to them was immediately sent flying by the violent strength chi. Such a violent shockwave instantly turned all the houses around the square into ruins. Fortunately, most of the people in the village were not ordinary people, and those who dared to come close to watch the battle were experts of a certain level of strength. But even so, the aftermath of the battle still caused them serious internal injuries. It was too terrifying. Just the aftermath of the battle between the 2 of them could cause such a huge amount of damage. Was he still human? Zhao Xinghuai lay on the ground, trembling. Suddenly, he came to his senses and quickly stood up, clutching his chest in pain. Then he pulled Li Hoan up, turned around, and shouted to the crowd behind him, "Everyone, run! Leave the village. The farther the better." The crowd of onlookers fled in all directions. A battle of this level was no longer something they could watch. On the square, the shock wave caused by the battle between the 2 of them finally subsided. The square, which was originally the size of 2 basketball courts, seemed to have been hit by a huge invisible iron ball. With Chun-Shi as the center, a huge circular crater appeared on the ground of the square. The deepest part of the crater was at least 5 meters deep. Chun-Shi floated in the middle of the crater, facing the divine general of the stellar of time in the sky. After this collision, they had more or less figured out each other's strength, so they did not intend to attack immediately. The divine general looked at Chun-Shi thoughtfully, then suddenly laughed. "Your cultivation is not very high, but the move you used just now was really powerful. From the looks of it, he seemed to be very interested in the sword art that Chun-Shi had just used. Is that so? Chun-Shi raised her eyelids and looked at the tall and sturdy man. She couldn't help but sneer. The divine general in front of him was not an immortal cultivator, but after exchanging blows with him, Chun-Shi could roughly estimate his strength. Above Yuanying and below soul formation. What about himself? In fact, he was now like a sorcerer without mana. He still had his realm, but his accumulation of vital energy was far from enough. When the array was activated just now, Chun-Shi took the opportunity to absorb a wave of spiritual energy from heaven and earth, which allowed him to successfully use the third move of the Moonlight Sword technique. 10,000 swords returned to origin. Chun-Shi floated above the crater, holding the long sword silently, as if he was thinking about something. The divine general did not seem to be in a hurry, because the person in front of him had indeed piqued his interest. After a while. Chapter 128. Wasting time? He was probably stalling for time. After hearing the elder's words, the immortal general lowered his head and looked at Chun-Shi with a faint smile. He thought for a moment and suddenly spread his hands. Following that, 2 golden fireballs leaped up from his palms. I'm very interested in the sword technique you used just now. If you give it to me, I promise I won't attack again. He was very interested in Chun-Shi's sword technique. The expressions of the few old men who were hiding nearby changed drastically when they heard his words. If the immortal general didn't attack, then after he left, that young man would probably massacre the entire village. If they had known this would happen, they would have just returned the Een soul to him. Chun-Shi held his sword and floated above the giant pit. He lowered his head and didn't say a word. No one knew what he was thinking. After hearing the immortal general's words, Chun-Shi looked up at him. It seemed that he didn't like the feeling of looking up at others. So Chun-Shi flew up until he reached the same height as the immortal general. Then he said calmly, "You want my sword technique? You have good taste." The Moonlight Sword technique was comparable to the 49 forms of heaven's divination. There were only 3 forms, but the power of these 3 forms would increase as the user's realm increased. Gold will always shine. Your cultivation isn't high enough, so you won't be able to use the true power of this sword technique. Why don't you give it to me? What do you think? The immortal general smiled. As he spoke, he looked at the 2 golden fireballs in his palms. The golden fireballs kept jumping, as if they were silently threatening him. I might not be able to kill you in 30 minutes, but I don't think it'll be a big problem if I want to seriously injure you. The immortal general was very confident, as if he had Chun-Shi under control. Hearing this, Chun-Shi couldn't help but laugh. This sword technique is called the Moonlight Sword technique. It's of the Een attribute. It might conflict with your fire attribute technique. That's not important. No one will complain about having too many techniques. The immortal general said indifferently. However, Chun-Shi's next words stunned him. I have a set of saber techniques that are comparable to a sword technique. It's of the Yang attribute. I think it'll be compatible with your technique. As soon as he finished speaking, Chun-Shi gently raised his left hand. Then, a gust of wind suddenly blew in the deep pit below him. A small tornado suddenly rose from the bottom of the pit. Then, it wrapped the dust and gravel on the ground and flew directly toward Chun-Shi's left hand. In the blink of an eye, a long saber made of dust suddenly appeared in his hand. After the dust blade was formed, it immediately formed a sharp contrast with the frost sword in his right hand. The saber was yellow, but the sword was clear and bright. Dust was the knife, frost and snow were the sword. He wanted to kill everyone in the world. The immortal general was stunned for a moment. Then he suddenly laughed wildly. Saber and sword mastery? Interesting. Then let me see if your saber is worthy of your sword. With that, the divine general clasped his hands together. The 2 sun-like blazing fireballs immediately merged into one, erupting with a powerful shockwave. An incomparably dazzling golden light suddenly exploded from his palm, illuminating the entire sky in a deathly white, the extreme of Yang fire, burning the sky and boiling the sea. While the immortal general was practicing, Chun-Shi was not idle. The frost sword in his right hand suddenly glowed with a faint cold light, and the dust blade in his left hand shone with a little yellow light. Moonlight sword technique. Red sun saber technique. The saber and the sword merged. The saber cut the wind, the sword cut the clouds, and the wind and clouds were disturbed. As soon as this move was made, the world suddenly changed color. There seemed to be a wave of saber and sword behind Chun-Shi. The invisible wind and visible clouds in the sky strangely disappeared at the moment when the saber and sword came out together. The saber and sword were annihilated, and the wind and clouds changed color. With Chun-Shi as the center, there seemed to be a vacuum zone within 100 feet. All the wind, clouds, dust, and even the spiritual chi of heaven and earth were expelled from the battlefield by him. Then, he slashed the saber and sword in his hand toward the immortal general. In the courtyard, after watching an episode of cartoons, the little fellow sat on the bed and shouted, "Papa, Papa, I want to pee." She was very clingy. She knew how to go to the bathroom by herself, but she just didn't want to go alone. The little fellow shouted for a while. Her father, who used to respond to her calls, didn't come today. She pouted and was obviously a little unhappy, so she immediately lay on the bed and rolled. "Papa, Papa, Papa, where did you go?" After all, Qin Ruoying was just a mortal, so she didn't have the five senses as sharp as Chun-Shi's. She was still standing in the yard in a daze. Although Chun-Shi could even kill great-granduncle with one sword, Qin Ruoying had a faint, unjustified worry after he left this time. She hadn't seen Chun-Shi for 5 years, and she was really afraid to be separated from him again. Papa was not here, and Mama didn't hear it. When the big cat saw that the little one was making a scene, it immediately jumped out of the bed and ran to Qin Ruoying's side. Then it rubbed its body against her feet. "Meow!" The big cat called Qin Ruoying back from her chaotic thoughts. As soon as she saw the big cat, she knew that something must have happened to Nianyan, so she ran to the west wing. Sure enough, before she stepped into the room, she had already heard the little fellow shouting for Papa. Children were always clingy, so sometimes when their mother was not around, they would start to look for their mother inexplicably when they went to the bathroom or went out to throw away the garbage. Once their mother didn't appear in time, then sorry. If it was light, they would be easily angry, and if it was heavy, they would cry, and it was very difficult to coax them. Qin Ruoying still spent too little time with the little fellow, so once the little fellow had anything, the first reaction was to look for her father, not her mother. She quickly sat beside the little fellow, gently helped her up, and then asked worriedly, "Nianyan, what's wrong?" "I want to pee." The little fellow pouted and said very discontentedly, "Then Mama will take you, okay?" As she said, Qin Ruoying reached out to pick up the little fellow. However, the little fellow pushed her away. "No, I want Papa. I want Papa." As she said, the little fellow suddenly pouted and cried, "I want Papa?" The more she said, the more upset she became, and bean-sized tears suddenly fell from the corners of her eyes. Qin Ruoying was a little at a loss and could only softly comfort her. "Papa went out to buy something and will be back soon. If you want to pee, Mama will go with you, okay?" "No, I want Papa." The little fellow sat on the bed, her little hands kept patting the bed, and her 2 legs kicked the bed at random. Looking at her like this, she was on the verge of exploding. Seeing her like this, Qin Ruoying suddenly looked a little embarrassed. After hesitating for a moment, she tentatively reached out her hand again. The little fellow did not refuse, and Qin Ruoying finally took her in her arms. "Nianyan, Papa went out to buy something, and he will be back soon. Nianyan, don't cry. Mama will be with you, okay?" "No. Papa said that he will never leave me. I want Papa. I want Papa." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying trembled all over, and could not help but cry. At this moment, she suddenly remembered the time when Nianyan was just born. At that time, the little fellow was still a cute baby. As long as she was not held for a while, she would cry loudly. Whenever little Nianyan cried, Qin Ruoying would hold her in her arms in a panic. Shaking and shaking, it would take a long time for little Nianyan to stop crying and giggle. So what she was most afraid of at that time was that the little fellow would cry time flew, and the child had grown so big. Chapter 129. Qin Ruoying held the little girl in her arms. All of a sudden, she seemed to realize something. When she left Nianyan was still young, so she had no impression of her. Although she came back later, he had been with the little girl since he came back. With his meticulous care and love, she succeeded in occupying more and more weight in the little girl's heart. He had surpassed her mother and Aunt Zhang. Therefore, the little girl only needed her father now. Her father was her whole world. The intimacy between the father and daughter at any time made Qin Ruoying feel very lost. Father, mother, child. They were supposed to be a close family of three. But because of the short separation before, there was a faint sense of alienation between them. The reason why Qin Ruoying felt alienated from Nianyan was that she hadn't realized how she should integrate into the family. Because of Nianyan's birth, the simple two-person world between her and Chen, she had completely turned into a brand new three-person world. As the father and mother, they had never appeared by the little girl's side at the same time. With the reunion of the family, when she showed great strength and confidence, Qin Ruoying was lost. It was a feeling that could make any woman lose herself. At the same time, it was also called a sense of security. Therefore, she felt extremely worried when she just left for a while. Just like Nianyan, she had to look for her father when she went to the toilet. Compared to her daughter, how much better was she? The mother and daughter were too dependent on Shi. He was the perfect husband and the perfect father. She, on the other hand, was just an unqualified mother. Thinking of this, Qin Ruoying suddenly stopped crying. After wiping her eyes without leaving a trace, she let go of the little girl and carefully wiped her tears. Nianyan, don't cry. Daddy didn't leave you. He just went to buy groceries. He'll be back soon to cook for you. Don't you like Daddy's cooking the most? What do you want to eat tonight? I don't want to eat. I want Daddy. The little guy kicked the bed, still throwing a tantrum. Qin Ruoying had no choice but to hug her gently and keep trying to reason with her. After a long while, after the little girl calmed down a little, Qin Ruoying immediately picked her up and carried her to the bathroom. Let's go. Don't you want to pee? Mama will take you there. Be careful not to wet the bed again. Hearing this, the little guy was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He immediately pouted and shouted softly, I don't wet the bed. In the past life and in this life, the two looked at each other. The sword and the sword were used to cut off their worries. I walk alone in the heavens and under the earth. I am duty-bound and crazy for love. This set of sword and saber techniques didn't originate from the heavenly Yen divine sect. Instead, it was an ancient inheritance that she obtained by chance. The Dark Heaven Evil Emperor. The third form of the saber, the third form of the sword. The third form of sword and saber. 3 by 3 is inexhaustible, 9 by 9 returns to 1. The saber cut the wind, the sword cut the clouds, and the wind and clouds were disturbed. Although it was a divine skill, it didn't change the fact that Shi's cultivation had been damaged. Shi, who was seriously injured, faced the divine general who was in his peak state. The divine general held the golden crow in his hand. It was like the sun had descended to earth. Thousands of golden pillars of fire swore to burn everything in the world to ashes. Shi's face was as calm as water. After the sword and saber slashed out, 2 huge shadows appeared in the sky. A saber and a sword instantly collided with the scorching fireball. When the saber and sword shadows collided with the raging flames in the sky, the entire world shook. The shockwave that shot out in all directions instantly dimmed the 5 golden pillars. The huge cloud vortex in the sky also trembled, almost being torn apart by the violent strength qi and vanishing into thin air. The spirit-binding array was on the verge of collapse. A few elders hid behind the hill behind the ancestral hall. After the wind and smoke dissipated, they cautiously poked their heads out. The scene in front of them completely stunned them. Annihilation. Everything was annihilated. This village with a long history was instantly razed to the ground by such a violent collision. When the smoke and dust dissipated, A huge circular crater with a diameter of hundreds of meters appeared below the two of them. The land was originally flat, the houses were neat, and there were fertile fields, beautiful ponds, mulberry trees, and other plants. It was a paradise where chickens and dogs could hear each other. Now it was completely gone. Even the small hill that they were hiding in had been cut in half. The divine general was still floating in the air. He wasn't wearing a shirt, revealing his strong muscles. The flames that kept rising around him like flames had already disappeared. Chi! There were no scars on his bronze-colored skin. But then, the divine general was like a broken shower head. Tiny flowers of blood splattered all over his body. Not long after, his entire body was dyed red with blood. She held the saber in his left hand and the sword in his right, as if he had never moved. But if one looked closely, they would find that she was in a very strange state. His eyes were empty, as if he had lost his soul. The saber and sword were still in his hands, but there was a faint blood-red light around him. The confidence and wild laughter on the divine general's face had disappeared, leaving only fear. Yes, he was scared. Because his injuries were too serious, he couldn't even maintain flying. So, the divine general immediately made a wise decision. Run. However, the moment he turned around, the blood-red light behind him lit up. The blood-red light that was as delicate and beautiful as fresh blood instantly dyed the entire sky red. The pillar of light that pierced through the clouds disappeared. The cloud vortex dissipated. The tortoiseshell-like golden barrier slowly turned into white smoke and disappeared. The wind and snow were still in the sky. The cold wind whistled through the sky with snowflakes. It was as if summer had turned to winter in an instant. A blood-red sword light suddenly slashed out. Bang! The hillside where the elders were hiding was immediately razed to the ground. Where is the soul of Xian Nu? The cold and emotionless voice suddenly sounded in the sky. Hearing this, the leading old man immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed heavily. Then, he tremblingly took out a black box and shouted, "The soul of the mysterious fairy is here. If I may be so bold, please spare our lives, immortal master." He knelt on the ground and held the box tightly with both hands, as if he was begging for mercy. This box was their only chance to live. If that man didn't agree, then they could only destroy this box. They would fight to the death. However, just as the old man was about to say something, a long sword of frost and snow suddenly formed in the sky above his head. Then, a blood-red sword light suddenly fell. Thud! The box fell to the ground and rolled a few times before lying down quietly in the mud. She casually waved his hand. The box seemed to have sensed something. After trembling slightly, it suddenly flew into his hand. After getting the box, she glanced around indifferently. The village had been reduced to nothing. The villagers had also retreated to the edge of the array. Everyone huddled together and trembled as they looked at the godlike man in the sky. He thought for a moment, then turned around and flew in the direction he came from. However, the moment he turned around and flew away, 6 blood-red sword lights suddenly appeared in the sky. Chapter 130. In the courtyard, Qin Ruoying took the little fellow to the bathroom and wiped her face with a hot towel. The little fellow stopped crying at this time. She stood on the ground with her mouth pursed and her face full of grievance. But she looked very cute. Because she had just washed her face, the little fellow's little face was red. Like a ripe red apple, Qin Ruoying could not help but reach out and gently pinch her pink little face. "I want to pee." As if to show her independence, the little fellow quickly ran to the side of the toilet and sat on it by herself. It was the first time Qin Ruoying saw her daughter go to the bathroom, and she could not help but feel a little strange, however. She was worried that the little fellow would fall, so she quickly walked over and gently held her. After going to the bathroom, the little fellow did not want Qin Ruoying to hold her and ran out without washing her hands. Qin Ruoying quickly followed behind her and found that she wanted to open the door and go out. So she quickly stopped her and asked nervously, "Nian, where are you going?" She was afraid that the little fellow would run out to find her father. However, the little fellow did not seem to have that idea, but pouted and replied, "Papa said that after watching an episode of cartoons, we should go out and exercise. I want to exercise." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying could only smile bitterly and open the door for her. This child, 3 sentences without leaving her father's side, did not consider her mother's feelings. A gust of cold wind suddenly blew in when the door opened. The little fellow shivered, but did not shrink back. Instead, she shouted loudly, "Big cat! Big cat! Let's go play in the yard." Meow. The big cat lay at the foot of the bed, seemingly unwilling to move. Seeing this, the little fellow was immediately unhappy. She quickly ran to the side of the bed and pressed down on the big cat. Then, she took it into her arms and carried it out of the west wing. "Papa said that you have to play with me." Meow. Although the big cat was a monster, it still had the nature of an animal, so when winter came, it was lazy and did not want to move much. However, since the little fellow said so, it had to obediently accompany her. The inner courtyard had been completely destroyed by Chen Shi, and there was a big hole in the middle. Qin Ruoying was afraid that she would run into the hole and fall, so she quickly said, "Nian, just play on the steps. What do you want to play? Mommy can play with you." The little fellow put the big cat and seemed to think that there was no way to play in the yard, so she could not help but wrinkle her little face, as if she was thinking about what she should play. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying immediately racked her brains to think of something. What to play? She had to say, as a mother's mother, therefore, it was best to take this opportunity to cultivate a good relationship with the little fellow. Qin Ruoying thought for a while, and then suddenly came up with a wonderful idea, so she immediately said to the little fellow, "Nian, Mommy will play hide and seek with you. How about it? Hide and seek?" The little fellow was stunned for a moment, and then jumped up happily. She was so happy that she clapped her hands and shouted, "Okay, I want to play hide and seek." She had been yearning for hide and seek for a long time. It was just that she used to live in the Kangju district, and that house was too small so she could not play. Aunt Zhang did not like her to run around in the district, so she had never allowed her to play hide and seek with other children. Therefore, when Qin Ruoying proposed this idea, the little fellow was immediately excited. The courtyard was so big, and there were so many rooms. It was perfect for playing hide and seek. The mother and daughter quickly reached a consensus. Qin Ruoying found, and the little fellow hid. After the discussion, Qin Ruoying leaned against the wall and loudly chanted the 30-second countdown. Hearing her countdown, the little fellow, who was still giggling, immediately panicked. She looked around for a while, then suddenly jumped into the west wing, and then hurriedly hid in the closet. The west wing was the place she was most familiar with, so her first reaction was to go back to the room. This was the first time she played hide and seek, so she did not have much experience, so she made a lot of noise. After Qin Ruoying finished counting down, she walked into the room with a faint smile. After looking around, she knew that the little fellow must have hidden in the closet. "Nian, where did you hide? Mommy can't find you." She pretended to wander around the room. The little fellow covered her mouth with both hands and nervously hid in the closet. She didn't even dare to breathe. Qin Ruoying counted the time. About 2 minutes later, she approached the wardrobe as she spoke. Because she was afraid of scaring the little fellow, she paused outside the closet for a while, and then slowly opened the closet door. "Found you! Mommy, you're amazing." Seeing Qin Ruoying open the wardrobe door, the little girl didn't hide anymore. She immediately jumped into Qin Ruoying's arms and giggled. "How is it? Is it fun?" "It's fun. I want to play more." "Well, I'll give you another chance. This time, you have to hide better." "Okay." The little guy nodded his head heavily. Looking at her excited little face, she had probably long forgotten about her father. If you want to get along with children happily, you have to have 3 hearts: patience, love, and consideration. What's more, Nian was Qin Ruoying's favorite. Therefore, after she adjusted her state of mind, she immediately played with the little fellow. With her mother's company, time passed quickly. When Qin Ruoying found the little fellow for the 5th time, Chen Shi finally came back. Like a gust of wind, He appeared in the courtyard without a sound. Qin Ruoying followed the little fellow. As soon as she walked out of the room, she saw Chun Shi. She froze for a moment, but the little fellow had already rushed to Chun Shi, shouting, "Papa!" Chun Shi was afraid that she would slip, so he quickly stepped forward and picked her up. "What's wrong? What are you playing?" "Hide and seek. Mommy, play hide and seek with me. Is it fun?" "It's fun." Qin Ruoying looked at Chun Shi in a daze. Chun Shi was playing with the little fellow in his arms, as if there was nothing strange. What else did he want to hide? But could he hide it? Perhaps seeing the worry in Qin Ruoying's eyes, Chun Shi put the little fellow down with a smile, then touched her head and said with a smile, "Ninian, it's cold outside. Go back to the room first." "Okay." Seeing that her father was back, the little fellow was relieved, so she ran back to the room happily. After the little fellow left, Qin Ruoying finally couldn't help but grab Chun Shi's arm and ask anxiously, "Are you hurt? Where is the injury? Is it serious?" As she spoke, she looked up and down at Chun Shi nervously. Chun Shi had no trace of injury. However, his face was devoid of any color, and his lips were deathly pale. He looked like a patient who had lost too much blood. "I'm fine, don't worry." Chapter 131. Chun Shi handed the box to Qin Ruoying as if she was presenting a treasure. She thought that Qin Ruoying would be very happy, but she didn't expect that after seeing the box. Qin Ruoying had a complicated expression on her face. Chun Shi didn't understand, so he asked in confusion, "Ying, what's wrong? Are you unhappy?" Qin Ruoying didn't say anything, but her expression was also complicated. Chun Shi thought she didn't understand the importance of this, so he explained, "The reason you can't sense qi is because when you became Xian Nu, they extracted your earthly soul. A person has 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. Without 1 spiritual soul, you can't be considered a complete person. It's because of this that you can't cultivate." Before Chun Shi could finish, Qin Ruoying suddenly interrupted him. "I can choose not to cultivate." With that, Qin Ruoying hurriedly took Chun Shi's hand and sighed softly. "Do you know what my wish was when I was 8 years old? The wish you made when you became Xian Nu?" "Yes, Xian Nu can make a wish. I didn't have the same ambition as Yuan Qing back then, so my wish was very simple. I only wanted to live a peaceful and happy life like a normal person." When she said this, Chun Shi suddenly understood something. He looked at Qin Ruoying's serious expression and couldn't help but gently pull her into his arms. Then he said solemnly to her, "I'm sorry, Ying, I made you worry." Chun Shi hadn't been injured in the battle with the Divine General. However, he had paid a heavy price because of this, because he had burned another drop of essence blood. Essence blood, the essence of blood, was also the life source of a cultivator. Essence blood contained enormous energy. Many demonic and evil techniques even relied on stealing the essence blood of others to increase their own cultivation. Chun Shi used a secret technique to burn his essence blood, allowing himself to explode with power close to his peak for a short period of time. This allowed him to successfully kill the Divine General, who was comparable to a complete Yuanying. Essence blood wasn't present at birth, but gradually condensed as a cultivator's cultivation grew. After 500 years of accumulation, Chun Shi had actually only accumulated 3 drops of essence blood. Before returning to Earth, he had already burned a drop because he didn't have enough vital essence. The Divine General had burned another drop. Therefore, he only had 1 drop of essence blood left. If he lost even this drop of essence blood, Chun Shi wouldn't be far from death. Regret? Absolutely not. Even if I die, my heart won't be covered in dust. Qin Ruoying looked at Chun Shi's slightly pale face and couldn't help but reach out to touch it. After feeling the warmth from his face, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but murmur, "Maybe it's because of Xian Nu's identity that I've basically fulfilled all the wishes I've made before. Just think of it as greed, so I have a new wish." Speaking of this, Qin Ruoying suddenly laughed, then turned to look at the room. At this time, the little girl's giggles sounded in the room. "Silly child. Watching cartoons alone can make you convulse with laughter." After the Earth Soul returned to its original position, Qin Shueqing really found the sense of qi. That kind of mysterious feeling made her, a martial arts fanatic, immediately intoxicated. Faintly, she even had an illusion. The long-sealed gate of the Alcade state seemed to finally show a sign of loosening. She could finally step into the Alcade state. Qin Wanqing was still struggling to break through to the Alcade realm. Qin Yongyan, on the other hand, started cultivating a few days earlier than her and took the spirit-gathering pill. Therefore, he smoothly stepped into the early stage of qi refinement and directly stepped into the Alcade realm. He was now a grandmaster of the Alcade state. This also made him more convinced that what Chun Shi taught them was much more powerful than martial arts. His father-in-law and sister-in-law were both obsessed with cultivation, so they didn't even come out for dinner. Chun Shi didn't want to interrupt this kind of state where they forgot to eat and sleep, so he left some food in the refrigerator for them. After dinner, Chun Shi wanted Qin Ruoying to also cultivate. But at this time, Qin Ruoying shook her head and proposed to take a walk in Ho-Hai. Take a walk? The little girl was lying on the bed. After hearing her mother's suggestion, she immediately raised her hands and feet, expressing her absolute approval. Being cooped up at home every day, this little girl was about to become moldy. In winter, the sun set early. It wasn't even 7 o'clock in the evening, but some places without streetlights were already pitch black. Outside the big house, one could see the old street light at the entrance of Dongming Alley. The light of the street light was slightly yellow, elongating the shadows of the family of three. The little girl held Qin Ruoying's left hand and Chun Shi's right hand. She squatted on the snow, and her two small cotton boots seemed to have turned into skis, constantly yelling for them to run. Just like the sleigh pulling the carriage at Christmas, her parents were the elk pulling the carriage. And she was Santa Claus bringing joy to the mortal world. Since their daughter had this request, her parents had to agree even if they had to work like cows or horses. Thus, Qin Ruoying and Chun Shi looked at each other and smiled, and immediately pulled her to a trot. Giddy up! Horse, run! Horse, run! The sleigh started running, and the little girl's 2 feet immediately pulled a long track on the ground. She was so happy that she giggled, feeling that it seemed to be more interesting than riding a big cat. Qin Ruoying's physical fitness was average. In winter, she wore a lot of clothes, and the snow was difficult to walk on, so after running for a while, she was tired and panting. And because she was so happy, she kept laughing. The intense exercise and the stimulation of the cold air immediately caused a sharp pain in her abdomen. Exercise-induced abdominal pain. Ouch! Qin Ruoying gasped for air as she clutched her stomach and groaned. Seeing this, Chun Shi quickly stopped. Chun Shi used his true essence to help her recuperate. After seeing that she was better, Chun Shi said to the little girl, "Mommy's body isn't good. Nyen Nyen, come, Daddy will play with you. Today, I'll let you experience what it means to be fast and furious." Okay. After Qin Ruoying stopped, the little girl sat down on the ground. Hearing Chun Shi's words, she immediately stretched out her hands and took Chun Shi's right hand. "Little princess, let's go." After that, Chun Shi started running. In this kind of snow, they couldn't run too fast. If the little girl couldn't control herself, she would be dragged to the ground by Chun Shi. Therefore, Chun Shi could only pay attention to the little girl's state while slowly speeding up. In fact, the speed was not very fast, but the little girl was very excited. She happily giggled and said, "Papa, come on! Papa, come on!" It was really much more fun than riding a big cat. Ho-Hai had not completely frozen, and the skating rink had not been opened, so now Shikahai looked a little deserted. The weather was still too cold, so the family of three returned home after a round. In the evening, after the little girl fell asleep, Qin Ruoying finally began to cultivate. She had figured it out. If she neglected her daughter because of cultivation, then she was not worthy of being Nyen Nyen's mother. In a dark room, the little girl fell asleep sweetly, while Chun Shi and Qin Ruoying sat cross-legged on her left and right. Suddenly, Chun Shi opened his eyes. Chapter 132. Outside the house, the cold wind was whistling. The big pit that she had stepped on had been covered with a shallow layer of snow. The bluestone floor was broken into pieces, protruding in the east and concave in the west. There were thousands of gullies, and if one was not careful, one would slide down. Seeing that the little fellow's activity area was suddenly missing such a large area because of him, she thought that he should find someone to repair it tomorrow, so that the little fellow could continue to gallop in the yard. Perhaps he could also buy her a set of children's outdoor expansion equipment. Just like the large-scale expansion equipment in the shopping mall, there were tire arrays, rock climbing, balance boards, ring bridges, scaling ladders, and so on. It was very playable and could also be used to train the little fellow's balance, athletic ability, coordination ability, and many other aspects. She did not consider letting the little fellow cultivate for the time being. That was because Nian still had to go to school in the future. At that time, she would definitely play with other children in school. If she lost control a little and slapped other children, it would be troublesome. Therefore, it would not be too late to teach her cultivation when she was a little more sensible. While thinking, she flew out of the yard. He wanted to go out and find another place to cultivate. Although the spiritual energy of heaven and earth near Shikahai was very rich, now his wife, sister-in-law, and father-in-law were all cultivating here. The cultivation of the three of them was still shallow, so it didn't matter if they were crowded together. However, Shi's cultivation was too high, so he must not stay with them, because once he started cultivating, he would immediately form a spiritual energy black hole in the courtyard, sucking all the spiritual energy of heaven and earth nearby into his body. How could others cultivate like this? Therefore, she could only come out and find another place. Since returning to Earth, she had never deliberately wanted to cultivate. The reason why he changed his mind now was that after the battle with the Divine General, he suddenly had a sense of crisis. If he began to wholeheartedly restore his cultivation after returning to Earth, why would he waste a drop of blood essence today? Strength was the basic guarantee of a happy life. In order to make his happy life last longer, she decided to start cultivating seriously. In the past, he had nothing to live for, but now he was full of happiness, so his fighting spirit was high. If he wanted to cultivate, he had to first find a suitable blessed enclave. Blessed enclaves were usually located in places where there were very few people. For example, in the mountains and on the islands, it was very easy for blessed lands to appear. The so-called blessed enclave was actually a place with dense heaven and earth spirit qi. As the capital of the country, Shangjing's geographical location was excellent. It was located at the intersection of the plains and the mountains. The steep mountains, the rushing rivers, and the fertile plains were all in one place. It was a treasure trove of wind and water. It was also the best place to build the capital. There were two mountain ranges in the vicinity. The Taihang mountain range ran from the north to the south and was majestic. The Yen mountain range ran from the west to the east and was vast and boundless. To the west was Taihang mountain, and to the north was Mount Yen. Mount Yen was still a bit small and not grand enough, so she thought for a moment and directly eliminated Mount Yen. Now that the tourism industry was developed, places with slightly better scenery were all listed as scenic spots. It was estimated that when the big cat was looking for a place to cultivate, it also took a lot of effort to find Mount Amei. She flew and searched. It wasn't until he flew over the Spirit Mountain in the western suburbs of Shangjing that he finally found a remote place with dense heaven and earth spirit qi. This mountain range was steep, and it was estimated to be more than 2,000 meters above sea level. The top of the mountain was already covered with a thick layer of snow. Standing on the top of the mountain, when the clouds surged, the clouds paved a road, and people walked in the sky. It was like a fairyland. She looked around, and after confirming that there was no one else around, he sat cross-legged on a large rock at the top of the mountain and began cultivating. As he gradually entered the state, Shi's body seemed to turn into a black hole, and the surrounding heaven and earth spirit qi rushed towards him. Within a radius of tens of meters, there was strangely no wind, like a color photo, and everything seemed to be still. On the top of the snowy mountain, a bright moon hung in the sky, and the surrounding stars were overshadowed. Time flew. When Shi opened his eyes again, The sun on the horizon just happened to show a corner of the clouds. Thousands of clusters of golden arrows burst out from the clouds and reflected on his body, as if covering him with a golden gauze. Cultivation was dry and boring to begin with because it was a process that accumulated over time. Chun-Shi was not in a hurry. After seeing the sun rise, he immediately got up and left the top of the mountain, because he had to go back to prepare breakfast for the little fellow. Qin Ruoying now also made up her mind to accompany Nianyan during the day and find time to cultivate at night. She wanted to let the little fellow deeply feel what was called motherly love. Of course, this kind of love was not without limits. Appropriate love was called doting. Once it went beyond the limit, it became doting. To any child, being spoiled was definitely not beneficial. Qin Ruoying also put in a lot of effort. Although she had only been with Nianyan for a few days, she was very keen to find a problem that had not yet occurred. Nianyan was very smart and sensible, and she rarely lost her temper. Although sometimes she also liked to make trouble, more often than not, Nianyan liked to quietly watch cartoons with the big cat. Nianyan never seemed to be very interested in the outside world. Playing games with her parents, watching cartoons with the big cat. This was all the content of her life. This way of life was absolutely wrong, because she lacked communication with her peers, and also relatively lacked the psychological and ability to socialize. Although the big cat was a monster, and its intelligence was far superior to that of a child, it could not speak, so there was no way to communicate with the little fellow. If the child had too little contact with the outside world from a young age, it may lead to an extremely serious consequence. That was, when the child grew up, he or she would become more and more withdrawn. If it was more serious, it would even evolve into a psychological illness such as low self-esteem, autism, depression, and so on. As a parent, in the child's growth process, it was obvious that they should take the initiative to create opportunities for the child to interact with strangers and unfamiliar environments, to increase the child's ability to socialize and adapt to the environment, and to cultivate a cheerful and optimistic character. Qin Ruoying looked at the little fellow who immediately climbed into bed after breakfast. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong, so she quickly told this problem to Chen-Shi. And when Chen-Shi heard what she said, he immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. After all, Aunt Zhang was old and in poor health, so she rarely took Nianyan out to play with other children. And after he came back, it seemed that he did not take Nianyan to play with other children. At most, he let the little fellow go to kindergarten, but after a few days he did not go. No. According to this progress, it seemed that Nianyan was likely to become more and more withdrawn. She looked very outgoing now, but that was because she stayed by her parents' side all day long. She could not be so introverted in front of her parents, right? What to do? Chapter 133. Walking side by side with me is obviously a tough task for a loner like him. The man in the condom. Humans were social creatures. Some Western scholars even categorized loners who do not socialize with others as antisocial personalities, because this in itself was a sign of morbidity. Being antisocial was different from being alone. Lonely people yearned to socialize with others. They would not be bored with anyone, and they would not even be on guard against everyone. Antisocial people were a kind of personality defect. They usually thought highly of themselves and looked down on others, but their hearts were extremely weak. They were afraid of being stabbed, so they did not want to socialize with others. When they had to socialize with others, antisocial people would also appear to behave strangely, and pretentiously. They always gave people a feeling of nervousness. They were actually very pitiful. They did not necessarily have antisocial psychology or violent tendencies, but they definitely felt autistic, lost, inferior, nervous, and depressed. They were unable to communicate with others normally, which made them prefer to be alone and live in isolation from others. There were not many congenital factors for the formation of antisocial personality. It was mainly due to the negative influence of various subjective and objective environments, which caused the psychological distortion caused by long-term depression. For example, if Nianyan continued like this, when she went to primary school in the future, it was likely that she would be ostracized by her classmates because she did not learn to communicate with her peers. She would be treated as an anomaly by her classmates. A little girl who only knew how to chat with cats all day. Was that not weird enough? The results of the survey showed that about 5% to 8% of the children in primary and secondary school groups would be antisocial. And this was already an extremely exaggerated number. Out of 20 people, there would be one antisocial individual. The class was a group, and antisocial children were always unable to integrate into this group. As a result, they were more likely to be ridiculed, ostracized, and criticized by their classmates. This situation would gradually decrease as the child grew older. However, this process was incomparably long for those pitiful children who were reclusive and eccentric. They would endure all kinds of psychological pressure, but in the end, they would only become a stepping stone in the growth process of others. Many years later, who would remember the freak who was ridiculed and teased in the class? Who would care if that freak was doing well now? Chun-Shi panicked. After all, he really couldn't cure mental illness. After some serious consideration, he quickly discussed with Qin Ruoying, "How about sending Nianyan to kindergarten?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying immediately nodded. She happened to have the same idea. Although Qin Ruoying wanted to spend more time with Nianyan, in order to give Nianyan a healthy and happy environment, it was better to be cautious. As long as it involved their children, any parent would become particularly worried. Even if there was only the slightest possibility, they had to eliminate that possibility in time. The couple reached a consensus. Thus, Chun-Shi sat beside the little fellow. "Nianyan, Daddy wants to discuss something with you. Okay?" The little fellow was busy watching cartoons. When Chun-Shi walked over, he happened to block her line of sight. After a hum, she directly lay on her side on the bed and continued to watch cartoons. Seeing this, Chun-Shi pretended to be serious and said, "Nianyan, Daddy is talking to you." The little fellow's eyes were full of doubts. After glancing at Chun-Shi, she muttered, "Papa, you're blocking me. Daddy is talking to you. Pause first or Daddy will be angry." Oh, Chun-Shi obviously had some weight in the little fellow's heart. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, she obediently took the remote control and pressed the pause button. Then she sat up very obediently. "Say it, Papa." Seeing that the little fellow was so obedient, Chun-Shi nodded very satisfactorily. Then, he gently held her in his arms and asked seriously, "Nianyan, do you want to go to kindergarten?" However, when the little fellow heard his question, he didn't even think about it and immediately shook his little head like a rattle drum. "No, I don't want to go to kindergarten." This was obviously out of Chun-Shi's expectation, so he quickly asked, "Why? Didn't you like kindergarten before?" Hearing this, the little fellow pouted and replied loudly, "I don't like kindergarten," perhaps to express her attitude. The little fellow even repeated, "I don't like kindergarten. I don't like it." She didn't play her cards according to common sense, and Chun-Shi was confused. In the past, she clearly wanted to go to kindergarten, but now she suddenly didn't want to go. She changed her mind too quickly. Chun-Shi had no choice but to patiently persuade her. "Nianyan, kindergarten is very fun. The teachers teach you to draw, put on little red flowers for you, and classmates play games with you. Why don't you want to go?" Hearing Chun-Shi's words, the little fellow instantly exploded. She didn't know why she suddenly became muddle-headed. After pushing Chun-Shi's arm away, she lay on the bed and rolled left and right, constantly muttering, "I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't like kindergarten." Chun-Shi was stunned. When did Nianyan become like this? She was simply a naughty child. Was there really a problem with his teaching methods? He still remembered that when he first came back, Nianyan was very obedient and sensible. How long had he been taking care of Nianyan? How did he raise the child like this? Thinking of this, Chun-Shi couldn't help but fall into deep reflection. Seeing that the little fellow had flipped out, Qin Ruoying also sat next to her. After gently helping the little fellow up, she patiently asked, "Nianyan, can you tell us why you don't want to go to kindergarten?" After hearing this question, the little fellow was stunned for a moment. But right after that, she burst into tears. This time, Qin Ruoying also panicked. She quickly took her into her arms and comforted her softly. Nian, don't cry. If you don't want to go, we won't force you. But you have to tell us why you don't want to go, right? The little fellow cried miserably. Seeing this, she hurriedly went to the bathroom and brought her a hot towel. The husband and wife worked together and spent a great deal of effort to stop the little fellow from crying. After a while, the little fellow sobbed, pursed her lips, and said very sadly, I don't want to go to kindergarten. I want to be with Papa and Mama. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but look at Chen Shi, and instantly understood the reason. This poor child. She was raised by Aunt Zhang alone before, and her parents were never by her side. Therefore, when the little fellow had her parents again, she didn't want to be separated from them for a moment. And this was obviously the root cause of her recent muddle-headedness. Since the child said so, it was obvious that she couldn't go to kindergarten. Qin Ruoying held Nian in her arms and thought for a while. Suddenly, she said to Chen Shi, how about we change the way? What way? Look at the cold weather. There aren't many parents who would bring their children out to play. Nian doesn't want to go to kindergarten. It's definitely not a way to go on. How about this? Let's open a bookstore or a restaurant or a coffee shop, so that Nian can meet many strangers. Chapter 134. Open a shop? This idea seems to be good. Of course, if it was other seasons, there would be no need to go through so much trouble. He could just take Nian out to Hohai every day. Over time, she would naturally meet some new friends. But unfortunately, it was winter now, and it was winter in the north. The temperature was low and the wind was strong. Before the ice skating rink was officially opened, the popularity of Shikahai during the day was very bleak. Of course, the so-called bleak popularity refers to the daytime. Hohai was really lively at night. If Sanliton's bar street was trendy, then Hohai's bar street would undoubtedly be artistic. A small alley, near the sea. There was no noisy music. The melodious singing coupled with the unique charm of the old Shangjing was definitely a melodious elegy in the modern city. It was really good to open a shop in this kind of artistic and fresh place. Anyway, they were idle all day. Opening a shop to take care of the little guy could also add some fun to their life. Thinking about it, it was also quite good. But the question was, what kind of shop should they open? Chen Shi didn't have any ideas. Since it was Qin Ruoying's suggestion, he might as well listen to her opinion. So he smiled and asked, what kind of shop do you want to open? Hearing this, Qin Ruoying frowned and pondered. They weren't short of money. Opening a shop was purely for fun and to create a new living environment for the little guy. The business couldn't be too good. If it was too good, they wouldn't have time to take care of the child. But it couldn't be too bad. If it was too bad, they could only stare blankly at the door all day. It was better not to open. After thinking for a while, Qin Ruoying couldn't think of a reason, so she proposed to go out and look at the shops around. Hohai Bar Street was formed after the end of the SARS, more than 10 years ago at an incomprehensible speed. She still vaguely remembered that there were only a few small pubs here before. But now, looking around, Hohai was densely packed with small pubs on both sides. The family of 3 walked around Hohai. The more Qin Ruoying looked, the more dissatisfied she was. Chen Shi saw this, but he didn't say anything. When the little fellow ran to the railing and checked whether the lake water was frozen, Chen Shi suddenly smiled and said, Ying, we only opened the shop to let Nian come into contact with more people. As for what kind of shop we open, it doesn't really matter. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but be stunned. After carefully thinking about Chen Shi's words, she said with some hesitation, I was wrong. Most of the places here are bars. It's really not suitable to open a bookstore. In fact, Qin Ruoying wanted to open a bookstore the most. However, Hohai was still a relatively mature business circle. Hohai Bar Street's reputation was comparable to Sanliton and Workers' Sports Complex. Therefore, other than bars, there were only a few tea houses, restaurants, food stalls, and so on. There weren't even many supermarkets. Fame had already determined that other shops couldn't survive here. Therefore, Qin Ruoying thought for a long time, but still couldn't think of what kind of shop they should open. She saw her hesitation and suggested with a smile, "Didn't you see a tea house with a shop for sale sign outside? How about we take it over?" Tea house? Qin Ruoying was a bit surprised, but after seeing Shi's serious expression, she had to seriously consider this proposal. In fact, compared to a tea house, Qin Ruoying was more inclined to a coffee shop. But unfortunately, coffee was a Western culture. Therefore, after coming to Hohai, a place with a strong folkloric flavor, it was somewhat unsuitable. When they were walking along the road, they already saw several closed coffee shops. Wuxia had a tea culture since ancient times. Tea was popular in the Tang dynasty and flourished in the Song dynasty. From the emperor to the literati to the common people, there was no one who didn't like tea. In the eyes of many young people, the style of coffee seemed to be much higher than tea. But in fact, coffee, cocoa, and tea were known as the three non-alcoholic drinks in the world. Silk, porcelain, and tea, these were also the business cards that Wuxia handed to the world. Before the bar street in Hohai rose, there were many tea houses here. Every summer, Hohai Lake was wide. The water was sparkling. Willows were hanging on both sides of the lake, lights were shining, and the palace walls and minarets in the distance were reflected in the water. From time to time, there were pleasure boats gently rowing. If at this time, there was a pot of good tea, sitting quietly by the lake and carefully tasting it, wouldn't it be pleasant? This was a kind of cultural charm belonging to Wuxia and also belonging to Hohai. Qin Ruoying was moved. Therefore, the couple immediately reached an agreement, called the little girl, and turned to the tea house with a shop for sale sign. The owner was a middle-aged man in his 40s. After hearing Shi's intention, he immediately enthusiastically introduced the tea house to them. The size of the tea house was not bad. The lobby was about 70 to 80 square meters, and there was a small courtyard of more than 50 square meters in the back. The overall decoration was very antique, exquisite, and elegant. The shop was the owner's own, because the business of the tea house was not very good. The owner did not intend to continue to operate, and was ready to rent out the shop to collect rent. The price of a shop in Hohai was not cheap. The better location of the shop, the rent for 1 square meter fluctuated around 300 yuan. In other words, such a large shop, the monthly rent would be at least 40,000 yuan. In a year, the rent alone was close to 500,000 yuan. It was really like an inch of land was worth an inch of gold. Because the owner was the landlord, the transfer fee was saved, but the renovation fee still had to be paid. She had a lot of money, but he did not want to be a sucker, so he negotiated the price with the owner. After some bargaining, the owner agreed to only charge 200,000 yuan for the renovation fee. The stock in the shop would be calculated separately, and the rent would be 35,000 a month, paid once a year, plus a month's deposit. In order to prevent Shi from saying that he was randomly charging the renovation fee, the owner even took out his previous renovation fee list, repeatedly saying that he spent 500,000 to renovate the shop, and if Shi rented it to someone else, he would receive 400,000 just for the transfer fee. Although he said so, it was up to Shi whether he believed it or not. After all, this was not a small matter, so the owner thought that the young couple would go back to discuss it. But what he did not expect was that the young couple did not hesitate for long. The two simply discussed a few words, and directly decided to rent. The price was agreed, then the next step was simple: look at the property certificate, sign the contract, clear the account, check the goods, pay the money, and a happy cooperation. The transfer of a shop was actually a very troublesome matter. If you want to change the name of the shop or change the type of business, then you have to let the owner go to the Trade and Commerce Bureau to cancel the original business license, and then Shi would go to register again. Shi found it troublesome, so he was too lazy to even change the name. Seeing that he was so straightforward, the owner signed an agreement with him, and then handed over the original business license to him. Therefore, in less than a day, this tea house, which was not far from Dongming Alley and adjacent to Hohai, had completely changed owners. Qingyi Tea House. This was the new business of the family of three. While Shi was signing the contract with the owner, the little girl took the big cat to wander around the tea house, from time to time touching here and there, as if she was very interested in this place. When Qin Ruoying saw her like this, her heart immediately felt relieved. Chapter 135. The next day, the little fellow was woken up by the sound of bricks colliding. She opened her eyes in a daze, climbed to the window, and found that a group of strangers were moving bluestones into the yard. She stood in the yard and directed the workers. When Qin Ruoying saw the little fellow get up, she immediately came to her and prepared to help her get up. "Mama, what are they doing? The yard is broken. Papa asked someone to repair it. After that, you can play in the yard again. Papa is so nice." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying immediately pinched her little face and asked, "What about Mama? Mama is so nice." The little fellow flattered, and Qin Ruoying immediately laughed. After gently picking up the little fellow from the bed, she smiled and said, "Let's go. Mama will take you to wash up." Okay. To repair the yard, first of all, the broken bluestone slabs had to be swept out, and then the mud from outside to fill the big hole. After that, the bluestone slabs could be laid again. The workers made a lot of noise. Qin Xueqing frowned and came out to take a look. Then she slammed the door and went back to the east wing. Recently, she and Qin Yongyan had been completely obsessed with cultivation. They often didn't even go out for a whole day. She didn't ask them to eat now. Anyway, after the family of 3 had eaten, she would put all the leftovers into the insulated cabinet. When Qin Xueqing and Qin Yongyan were hungry, they naturally knew to eat by themselves. After breakfast, she briefly explained to the person in charge of the decoration company that they must finish the work today. After that, the family of 3 went out. The original owner of the tea house was a very particular person. When he left yesterday, he had carefully cleaned the tea house. After a brief check, she took out a sign from the bar and hung it outside the door. It was open. He didn't even change the sign. He didn't know if there would be any old customers. She sat at the bar and seriously warned the little girl to be sweet and polite, and to take the initiative to greet the guests when they came in. After the little fellow listened to his incessant warning, she nodded her little head numbly. It was unknown whether she understood or not. She had already seen the boss's account book before, and the business was indeed not good. Because it was winter, there was basically no business in the tea house in the morning. It was only slightly better in the afternoon. Many customers who came to the bar because of its reputation would sit in the tea house with their friends for a while, chatting and playing cards before the bar opened. The tea house was open, and even the signboard was still the same. However, she had overlooked a very important issue. That was, opening a tea house required a certain amount of connections. The tea house itself was a business of acquaintances, and the gathering and dispersing of qi were closely related to the boss. A successful tea house must have a boss who could be called a social expert. The customers came for the boss, but they also dispersed because of the boss. Therefore, there was a saying often heard in the tea houses that business was good as long as the boss was there. If the boss was not there, there would be no ghosts. On the right side of the lobby, there was a bookshelf next to the window seat, on which were some of the world's classics that the former boss had bought before. Qin Ruoying casually flipped through, then picked up a book called Love in the Time of Cholera, and sat in the booth to read it. Seeing this, she poured a cup of tea and asked the little fellow to bring it to her. "Nian, come. Bring a cup of tea to mommy. Be careful, don't burn yourself." In order to make it convenient for the little fellow to take, she specially chose a hand cup, and only mixed 2/3 of the water. The little fellow held the cup with both hands and walked very slowly. When she carefully came to Qin Ruoying's side, she sweetly shouted, "Mommy, drink tea." Qin Ruoying read carefully, so when the little fellow called her, she found that the little fellow was still holding the teacup, so she quickly took the teacup from the little fellow's hand, and at the same time did not forget to praise, "Ah, Nian is so good." The little fellow was happy, and seemed to think that it was a very pleasant thing to serve tea to others, so she immediately turned and ran to the bar, looked up at Shi and asked, "Papa, when will the guests come?" Don't worry, take your time. The most important thing to do business is to be patient." Shi smiled and held her in his arms, and then the father and daughter sat behind the bar and chatted. The door opened at 9 o'clock in the morning. After waiting for 2 hours in boredom, the family of 3 finally welcomed their first guest after the opening. To Chun-Shi's surprise, the guest did not belong to the middle-aged group, but was a young girl. The girl stood outside the door and hesitated for a moment. After looking at the business sign outside the door, she pushed the door and walked in. She wasn't very old and looked to be about 20 years old. She should be at the age of a down jacket and jeans, but now she was wearing a long coat that did not match her temperament at all, and a combination of pantyhose and boots on the lower half of her body. The girl had put on makeup. Perhaps it was due to her poor technique, but her makeup gave off a strange feeling. Obviously, she was a natural hibiscus, but she had to paint a snake with legs and dress herself up a little. Of course, it would make people feel a little strange. The girl entered the tea house, looked around, and saw that the right side of the booth was already occupied, so she went directly to the left side of the lobby by the window. Seeing this, Chun-Shi quickly patted the little fellow, indicating that it was time for her to receive the guest. They opened the shop to train the little fellow's social skills. If the little fellow did not perform well, then it would not be too late for him to come forward. Both parents were here, so the little fellow did not seem to be afraid of strangers. After receiving Chun-Shi's signal, she ran over. "Sister, what do you want to drink?" Looking at the 4 or 5-year-old little girl in front of her, Xiao Yuan could not help but be stunned. This tea house was really strange. The waiter was actually an innocent and lovely child. Seeing that she did not speak, the little fellow thought that she did not hear her, so she asked sweetly again, "Sister, what do you want to drink?" "Papa said that we have everything here." Hearing this, Xiao Yuan could not help laughing, and her mood became much better. After glancing at the price list on the table, Xiao Yuan smiled at the little fellow and said, "Then black tea, thank you." "Oh, okay." The little fellow nodded blankly, as if she did not understand what black tea was. But that was not important. What was important was that they had a guest. So, the little fellow immediately turned around and ran back, shouting excitedly as she ran, "Papa, sister wants black tea. Black tea." The little fellow's voice was very loud and sounded very excited. Even Qin Ruoying was startled by her. "Okay, I got it." Chun-Shi smiled and patted the little fellow's head, then took out a packet of Kimun black tea from behind the bar counter. Because she was the first customer after the opening, Chun-Shi injected a trace of spiritual energy into the tea when he made it. Xiao Yuan would never have dreamed that she would be able to win the first prize by randomly finding a tea house before going to work. "Sister, drink tea." The little fellow's little mouth was very sweet, and her cute appearance was enough to make people melt, so Xiao Yuan was instantly captivated by her. Xiao Yuan hesitated for a moment, then quickly took out her phone and asked Chun-Shi behind the bar counter, "Boss, can I take a photo with your daughter?" Chun-Shi nodded and smiled. "As long as she agrees." Seeing that she was so popular, the little fellow was so happy that she could not close her mouth. After taking a photo with Xiao Yuan, the little fellow ran back to Chun-Shi's side, a little embarrassed. Then, she burrowed into his arms, rubbing left and right and acting coquettishly. Seeing the little fellow's proud look, Chun-Shi could not help but nod in satisfaction. Opening a shop allowed the little fellow to interact with strangers, and also allowed her to gain recognition through her performance. Chapter 136. After Xiao Yuan came, 3 more guests came one after another. They were all middle-aged, and it was obvious that they were regulars in the tea house. The 3 of them joked as they pushed open the door of the tea house, but after entering, they couldn't help but be stunned. One of them looked around the lobby with some doubts. After making sure that he didn't go in the wrong way, he looked at Chun-Shi behind the bar and asked, "Where's old Sue?" Hearing this, Chun-Shi explained with a smile, "This shop has been transferred. I'm the new owner here. Do you need anything?" "Oh." The man frowned and nodded, then turned to discuss with his companions. After the 3 of them whispered a few words, the one who spoke before said to Chun-Shi, "3 cups of plain tea. Okay, please sit wherever you want." After that, they walked directly to the booth behind Qin Ruoying, as if they were very familiar with this place. After seeing them come over, Qin Ruoying hesitated for a moment, then took the book back to the bar. After all, she was the lady boss. It was not good to always occupy the best seat. She took out 3 cups from the cabinet. The little girl reached out to take it, but she hurriedly stopped her and said with a smile, "Don't worry, you can't take 3 cups. Daddy will help you." "Oh, okay." The little girl took back her little hand and nodded obediently. After she handed the cup to her, the little girl carefully followed behind Shi with the cup and walked toward the 3 people. "Oh, boss, is this your daughter?" "Well, yes." "How old is she?" 4.5 years old. Seeing the little girl eagerly following behind Shi, the person who spoke just now couldn't help but exclaim, "Your daughter is so cute. She's exactly the same as my little one when she was young." She smiled very politely, then patted the little girl's head and said to her, "Ninian, Uncle is praising you. You're cute, quickly say thank you to Uncle." Hearing this, the little girl said sweetly, "Thank you, Uncle. Oh, your child is so cute." "That's right, why didn't my wife give me a daughter back then?" "Come on, with your shabby appearance. How could you give birth to such a beautiful daughter?" "In my opinion, if your wife had really given birth to such a beautiful daughter for you, I'm afraid you would have taken her for a paternity test long ago." "Bah! You can't spit out ivory from your dog mouth." The 3 of them seemed to have a good relationship with each other. She stood to the side and listened for a while, then said with a smile, "Please sit down. If there's anything you need, just tell me." "Okay. Boss, you don't mind us." A Happy's family was always eye-catching. Therefore, Qiao Yuan had been secretly sizing up the family of 3 sitting behind the bar. The boss was handsome, and the lady boss was beautiful and virtuous. They didn't seem to lack money at all, and most importantly, they had a well-behaved and sensible child. Thinking about it, Qiao Yuan couldn't help but have a trace of envy in her eyes. Perhaps she realized that she had lost her composure, but when she saw she look in her direction, Qiao Yuan immediately lowered her head, then picked up the black tea on the table and drank it. The black tea entered her mouth, and the taste was mellow. But when it slowly seeped into her throat, Qiao Yuan faintly felt that there was a delicate fragrance going from her throat to her stomach. The taste was extremely mellow, fragrant, and sweet, which was simply intoxicating. After tasting it carefully, Qiao Yuan felt that her whole person was much more awake, and there was a sudden feeling of enlightenment in front of her. She held the cup in front of her and carefully studied the black tea. "What kind of tea is this? Why is it so delicious? It seems to have the effect of refreshing the mind." Qiao Yuan took another sip, and after tasting it carefully, she suddenly thought of something and quickly looked at the price list on the table. "This cup of tea is so delicious, it must be very expensive, right?" Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel a little nervous. She had just looked at the price list, and if she remembered correctly, the cost here wasn't very high. However, the taste of this cup of tea made Qiao Yuan suspect that she had just seen wrongly, so she quickly picked up the price list and carefully looked at it. The cheapest was the vegetarian tea, 20 yuan per cup. Biluakun, 28 yuan per cup. Kimun black tea, 38 yuan per cup. And the most expensive Wui de Hong Pao, only 68 yuan per cup. 38 yuan? A cup of caramel macchiato at Starbucks cost more than 30 yuan, and such a mellow black tea only cost 38 yuan? For some reason, Qiao Yuan felt like she had picked up a bargain. If Shi knew what she was thinking now, he would probably be unable to help but chuckle. The tea leaves of this kind of tea house were usually bought wholesale from the tea market, 1 bag at a time. A bag of 500 grams, and a cup of 20 kilograms. Each cup of tea only required about 3 to 4 grams of tea leaves, and some people had a strong taste so they put more than 10 grams of tea leaves. On average, 1 bag of tea leaves could make at least 100 cups of tea. Of course, this didn't mean that the tea house was a profiteering industry. After a little careful calculation, one would know that this tea house was definitely a loss-making business. The profits were high, but the corresponding rent, water, and electricity were also very expensive. The rent here was 35,000 yuan. How many cups of tea would it take to earn that much? Moreover, customers could sit here for a whole day after ordering a cup of tea. The tea house was only so big, so even if the business was booming, there was no way to receive more customers after it was full. Xiao Yuan was still savoring the taste of the black tea when her phone suddenly rang. Xiao Yuan quickly picked up the phone, and a man's voice sounded on the other end. Xiao, you're in luck today. The bill is issued before noon. Come quickly, you can still get lunch. Okay, I'll be right there. After hanging up the phone, Xiao Yuan shouted to Chen Shi, "Boss, the bill." Hearing this, Chen Shi immediately patted the little girl and said with a smile, "Nian, go collect the money, 38 yuan. Remember to count it." The little girl thought for a moment and nodded. Then she jumped down from Qin Ruoying's arms and ran directly to Xiao Yuan. She imitated Chen Shi and said, "Sister, 38 yuan." Xiao Yuan took out 2 20s and handed them directly to the little girl when she came over. The little girl took the money and then ran back to the bar. "Papa, here." Seeing this, Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying couldn't help looking at each other, and both of them laughed. The child didn't know how to add and subtract. It was simply deliberately making things difficult for her to count the money. "Sister gave too much money, so we have to give her change. Come on, Nian, give these 2 yuan to sister." The little girl was a little confused. However, after hearing Chen Shi's words, she obediently took the 2 yuan and then ran quickly to Xiao Yuan. At this time, Xiao Yuan had already gotten up and was ready to go out. She seemed to have forgotten that the boss should give her change of 2 yuan. Seeing that she was about to push the door open and leave, the little girl hurriedly shouted, "Sister, your money." As she spoke, the little girl waved the money in her hand and ran excitedly to Xiao Yuan's side. Xiao Yuan raised her head and handed the 2 yuan to her. Xiao Yuan stopped and turned to take the 2 yuan in the little girl's hand. She touched her head and said with a smile, "Thank you, sister. Can you tell me your name?" "My name is Chun Yen. Sister, you can call me Nian." After that, the little girl immediately ran back to the bar, seeming a little embarrassed. "Goodbye, Nian. I'll come to see you tomorrow." Xiao Yuan smiled and shouted at the little girl's back. The little girl didn't look back, so she looked at the couple behind the bar and politely waved to them before leaving. Seeing this, Chen Shi smiled at her in response. Xiao Yuan left. Chapter 137. Lin Xian. Qin Ruoying hadn't seen Lin Xian for many years, so her impression of Lin Xian was still in college. However, Chen Shi's memory of Lin Xian was not long ago. The cruise ship, the dock, the palm trees. On that sunny afternoon, Lin Xian stood under the shade of the tree and watched the father and daughter get into the car and leave. She stood there for a long time. In fact, the Lin Xian of the past was quite similar to the girl just now. A girl from a small county came to Zhonghai, an international first-tier city, to study and work. At that time, Lin Xian had a kind of maturity that was incompatible with her peers. Of course, that so-called maturity, in retrospect, was also a kind of childishness. When all the impurities were washed away, the girl just now might become like Lin Xian now. Chen Shi thought about something thoughtfully. Qin Ruoying glanced at Chen Shi and suddenly asked with a smile, "What? Have you met Lin Xian?" Hearing this, Chen Shi immediately nodded and replied, "Yes, when I first came back, I asked her about you. When Fang Lei got married, she asked Nian to be her flower girl." "Fang Lei is married?" Thinking about it carefully, I haven't seen them in a long time. Do you think we should go back to Zhonghai to meet them? When do you want to go? Qin Ruoying thought for a moment, looked down at the little girl in her arms and said, "Let's talk about it next spring. The weather is cold. I don't want to go." "Okay." Chen Shi nodded, but then he suddenly thought of something and quickly took out his phone. "Oh, I almost forgot. Your back is such a big thing, we should tell Auntie Zhang the good news first." While speaking, Chen Shi opened WeChat. After sending a video call request to Auntie Zhang, Chen Shi handed the phone to Qin Ruoying. Qin Ruoying paused for a moment and quickly took the phone. The video call request rang a few times, then it went through with a beep. Auntie Zhang seemed to be busy with something. The screen showed the ceiling of her house. After she accepted the video call, She probably put the phone on the table. Yo, stinky brat. You finally remembered to give this old woman a call? Auntie Zhang's granddaughter was crying. She was so busy comforting her granddaughter that she didn't have time to look at the phone. Qin Ruoying looked at the screen. She didn't see Auntie Zhang, so she hesitated for a moment before saying gently, Auntie, it's me, Yingying. Auntie was stunned. Then, he grabbed the phone on the table and shouted at the camera with a surprised face, Oh my God, Yingying, when did you come back? Seeing that familiar face, Qin Ruoying was also slightly excited. She quickly replied, I just came back a few days ago. I'm discussing with Chun Shi when to go to Chengdu to visit you. Thank God, you're finally back. Where are Chun Shi and Yan? Come, let me see your family. Hearing Auntie Zhang's request, Qin Ruoying raised the phone high and then asked Chun Shi and the little girl to come over. In the video, Qin Ruoying leaned close to Chun Shi, and Chun Shi held the little girl in his arms. Both of them looked at her with a smile. The little girl poked her head out and saw Auntie Zhang in the video. She immediately shouted excitedly, Grandma! Grandma! As she shouted, she waved her little hand and motioned for Auntie Zhang to look at her. Io, your family is finally reunited. Looking at the family of 3 in the video, Auntie Zhang's words were also quite emotional. After so many twists and turns, they were finally reunited. Qin Ruoying and Auntie Zhang talked about old times, and Chun Shi held the little girl and listened with a smile. The two of them chatted for more than half an hour. When Auntie Zhang had to prepare lunch for her granddaughter, Qin Ruoying reluctantly said goodbye to her. She had already made an appointment with Auntie Zhang to go to Chengdu during the new year. Because of the tea house, Chun Shi casually ordered a few dishes at the Chinese restaurant next door for lunch. One for them and the other for the 2 cultivation maniacs at home. The business in the afternoon was indeed better. Before 3 o'clock, there were already 4 or 5 tables of customers. Qin Ruoying did the math. The average cost per table was 80 yuan. At least 15 tables of customers were needed to earn back the daily rent. This did not include the artificial water and electricity. Of course, they did not want to make money. Qin Ruoying did the math just for fun. The owner of the tea house was like an immortal couple, the lively and lovely daughter, and the black cat that lay on the bar all day long. In just 3 days, many people knew that the owner of the Qingyi tea house had changed. It was not because Chun Shi was really so eye-catching, but because of the sign hanging at the door. This tea house does not provide chess and card entertainment. This tea house had become a pure tea house. The so-called tea house did not provide chess and card entertainment, but only provided tea and a relatively quiet and relaxing environment. Many people came to the tea house to play cards, so when Chun Shi hung the sign outside that no chess and card entertainment was provided, the business of the tea house went downhill. However, there were gains and losses in everything. The chess and card tea house became a pure tea house. There were fewer individual customers, but more frequent customers. For example, Qiao Yuan. Since the day Qiao Yuan drank the black tea here, she would come to the tea house at 11 o'clock every morning. Then she would order a cup of black tea and quietly sit on the sofa to read the book she brought. When she did not receive a call, Qiao Yuan would sit in the tea house all day and would not leave until 6 o'clock in the evening. Every day was like this, so in just a few days she was very familiar with Yan. Chun Shi found out from chatting with her that Qiao Yuan was a junior at Beijing Normal University. The reason she came here every day was that she recently found a part-time job in Hohai. Her part-time job seemed a bit strange. After 3 days, she only went to work on the first day. For the next 2 days, she sat in the tea house all day reading and only left in the afternoon. Although Qiao Yuan did not say what her part-time job was, Chun Shi thought it might be related to the bar. This afternoon, including Qiao Yuan, there were only 3 tables of customers in the tea house. Suddenly, there was a sudden sound of tires braking on the street outside, followed by a burst of shouting. A customer was alarmed, so he curiously went out of the tea house to take a look. When he went out, he saw a large group of people standing in front of a bar not far away. It was not the opening hours of the bar, and those people did not look like they were here to drink. Some of them seemed to be here to make trouble. This was Hohai Seijo City, under the emperor's feet. It was strange that someone dared to make trouble here in broad daylight. The customer looked around and then asked his friends to come out and take a look. Qin Ruoying saw this and followed him out. Xiao Yuan sat by the window, so she wanted to see the situation outside through the window. But at this moment her phone suddenly rang, giving her a fright. Xiao Yuan answered the phone. After listening to a few words, her face changed greatly. She quickly hung up the phone, stood up from her seat, and looked around the tea house at a loss. She ran directly to the bar, and then said to Chen Shi with a pleading face, "Boss, can you let me hide here for a while?" Chapter 138. There was an empty space below the bar, which was just enough for one person to hide. When Chen Shi heard what she said, he was instantly amused. So the commotion outside was caused by her? Xiao Yuan gave Chen Shi a good impression of her. She seemed to be like Lin Xian in the past, with poor family conditions, which was why she chose to work part-time in her spare time. Although she deliberately dressed herself up to the nines, she still faintly emitted a reserved and inexperienced aura that belonged to her age. And this was not something that could be covered up by makeup and dressing up. "Then you sit here. I'll go out and take a look at the situation." As he spoke, Chen Shi stood up and gave up his chair. When Xiao Yuan saw this, she immediately squatted behind his chair, trying to use the bar and chair to hide her figure. When the little girl saw her sneaking around, she was instantly delighted. After clapping her hands to signal Chen Shi to put her down, the little girl ran directly in front of Xiao Yuan and said excitedly, "Sister, do you want to play hide and seek? I can play with you." Hearing this, Xiao Yuan could not help but be speechless. After nervously making a gesture, she then said softly to the little girl, "Nian, don't talk to me. Just pretend you didn't see me." The little girl looked at her blankly, as if she did not understand what she meant. Xiao Yuan thought for a while, then changed her way of saying, "There are bad people coming to catch me. You don't want sister to be caught by bad people, right?" When she heard this, the little girl finally understood. Hence, the little girl immediately shook her little head like a rattle drum, and at the same time, did not forget to say righteously, "Sister, don't be afraid. I'll protect you. Shoo. Just pretend you didn't see me." Seeing that Xiao Yuan was trying to explain the situation to the little girl with a conflicted expression, Chen Shi could not help but smile slightly. He stood behind the little girl, gently carried her up, then said to her, "Let sister stay here for a while. Daddy will bring you out to watch the commotion." "Oh, okay." Seeing that Chen Shi had rescued her from the evil clutches of the little fellow, Xiao Yuan immediately let out a sigh of relief. Then, she looked at Chen Shi with a complicated expression and said softly, "Boss, thank you." Hearing this, Chen Shi smiled at her and comforted her. "It's uncomfortable to squat. Sit on the chair. If you're really scared, I suggest you call the police now." After that, Chen Shi carried the little fellow out of the bar. Looking at his back as he left, Xiao Yuan looked down at the phone in her hand thoughtfully. But after a moment of hesitation, she still put the phone in her bag. Then, she hid under the bar counter, trying to hide better, outside the tea house. When Qin Ruoying saw Chen Shi carrying the little fellow out, she immediately came to his side. Chen Shi turned his head and saw that not far from the street, there were more than 10 or 20 people blocking the door of a bar. This group of people was not old, about 20 years old. They were very arrogant and their mouths were full of obscenities. A young man who looked like the person in charge of the bar was surrounded in the middle and seemed to be trying to discuss something with them. There were more and more people around. Chen Shi listened for a while and got a general idea of the situation. This was a shill bar. The so-called shill bar was that, while operating normally, it would arrange some keyboard players to chat with people on the internet, using dates as bait to lure people to come here to spend money. If it was a normal customer who came to the bar to spend money, then they would think that the bar was not bad and the cost was not high. But if it was a customer who was brought here by a bartender, then their spending here would be more than 10 times higher. Shill bars were not only in the form of bars. Many coffee shops, restaurants, gift shops, and even tea houses might be shill bars. Shill bars had become a complete industry chain, mainly composed of keyboard players, bartenders, and consumption places. Among them, the larger ones might also have a manager. Keyboard players disguised their information as a young and beautiful woman through social media software such as QQ, WeChat, Momo, Tantuan, or dating websites and dating forums, and then seduced some single men or men with bad intentions to come out and meet them. After the keyboard players chatted with the fat sheep online to a certain extent, the bartenders would come out to meet the customers. They did not need to be too beautiful, just with good facial features. In fact, they also used the dirty thoughts of some men. The meeting place was generally near the shill bar. The bartenders themselves were different from what the fat sheep saw on the internet. Most of the fat sheep would not doubt it, because most of them would be dazzled by this sudden encounter. After the meeting, the bartenders would first accompany the fat sheep for a walk, and then take the opportunity to say that they were tired and wanted to sit in the shill bar. Of course, the fat sheep would not refuse. Instead, he looked forward to the bartenders getting drunk. If the fat sheep had not been dazzled by the encounter, he would look at the price list before the bartenders ordered. The items in the shill bar were all priced clearly. If the fat sheep thought it was expensive, he could leave at any time. But if the fat sheep did not even look at the price list and directly wanted to pretend to be rich in front of the bartenders, then it would be embarrassing. 2 drinks and a fruit plate of 388 yuan. This was only the first step, and the price would be lighter. If the fat sheep agreed to let the bartenders order wine, it would be upgraded to the second step. A red wine that cost more than 10 yuan would be sold here for 1,888 yuan and 3,888 yuan. A black-hearted person could even ask for 8,888 yuan directly. If the fat sheep refused to pay, then sorry, the shill bar's hatchet man would come out. It was not a real fight but a threat. If he did not pay, he would not leave. A smarter fat sheep would ask to share with the bartenders, only give half of the money, and then call the police afterwards. However, it was a pity that the industry itself was in a gray area. As long as the boss of the shill bar was smart, even if the fat sheep called the police afterwards, the boss only needed to refund the money, because they did not break the law. There was a price list on each table. The price was clearly marked, and it was voluntary. Chow Yuan was obviously a bartender's. But what was strange was that the fat sheep were generally spendthrifts who did not have much social experience. This group of young people who blocked the door of the bar and made trouble were not good people at first glance. To put it bluntly, they were not cut out to be fat sheep. What the hell was going on here? She held the little fellow outside the tea house and watched the bustle. At this time, someone said, "She's in the tea house over there." After the group of people heard this sentence, they immediately rushed in the direction of Chun-Shi. Several guests in the tea house were still happily watching the bustle, but when they saw the group of people suddenly coming over, they quickly hid to the side. There was a street outside the tea house, and across the street was Ho-Hai. Chun-Shi and Qin Ruoying stood side by side at the entrance of the tea house. After the group of young people came over, they surrounded them. The little fellow was obviously frightened by their formation, so he immediately shrank back into Chun-Shi's arms. Seeing this, Chun-Shi handed the little fellow to Qin Ruoying, and then motioned her to take the child in first. Chapter 139. Chun-Shi calmly looked at the group of young people in front of him. Among the group of young people, the youngest was about 20 years old, and the oldest was no more than 25 years old. They were all dressed very fashionably, and a few of them were very handsome. However, they did not stand properly, and the moment they opened their mouths were full of obscenities, inadvertently giving people a frivolous and vulgar feeling. The leader was about 24 or 25 years old. After his companions surrounded the door of the tea house, he stood in front of Chun-Shi with a cigarette in his mouth. As if he wanted to create momentum for himself, the young man didn't hold back and directly blew a smoke ring at Chun-Shi. However, he didn't expect the wind to be very strong today. So just as he blew out the smoke ring, a sudden gust of wind blew the smoke ring directly into his face. Choked by the smoke, The young man immediately lowered his head and couldn't help but rub his eyes. As a result, the imposing manner that he had deliberately created was destroyed and completely disappeared. This young man was called Wang Hao, and he was also a famous person in Shangjing's nightclub circle. Whenever it was night time, it was time for Wang Hao to shuttle through the major bars. Recently, Wuxia suddenly set off a hip-hop craze, just like the rock craze of the 80s and 90s, which suddenly became popular all over the country. Wang Hao was one of the first underground rappers. After catching up with the hip-hop craze, he was also in the limelight in Shangjing. Most of the bars in Hohai were small bars, so Wang Hao wasn't familiar with this area. The reason why he brought people here today was because one of his brothers was cheated of money by a bartender. His brother was related to him and just came out from his hometown to mingle with him. Before, he was a very honest person and didn't see much of the world, so he didn't understand the twists and turns of the bar. After chatting with the keyboard player online for a while, the brother suddenly became hot-headed and wanted to ask the girl to come out and meet. Coincidentally, the bartender that the boss arranged for him was Chao Yuan. In terms of appearance, Chao Yuan's appearance was definitely the best among the group of bartenders. As a young man who had just come to Shangjing, when had he ever been in close contact with a beauty of this level? Therefore, he was mesmerized by Chao Yuan at that time. Chao Yuan didn't say much to him before he excitedly ordered some wine. The more he drank, the more confused he became. In the end, he directly opened a big order of 20,000 yuan. 20,000 yuan, 20% for the keyboard, 40% for the bartender, and another 40% for the boss. After the order was confirmed, Chao Yuan would get 8,000 yuan. Usually, the bill would only be settled once every half a month or a month. That was because if the customer called the police, the bill would be refunded. Therefore, the money had not yet reached Chao Yuan's hands. It was rare to see someone like Wang Hao who didn't call the police and instead brought his own people to cause trouble. Everyone was in the same business. Wang Hao was in the right now, so the boss decisively refunded the 20,000 yuan to him. But what was strange was that Wang Hao was not satisfied with the money he got back. He actually asked the boss to hand over Chao Yuan. This request was too much. The boss couldn't agree, so he tried to negotiate with them. However, while the boss was negotiating with Wang Hao, a girl who was usually jealous of Chao Yuan secretly betrayed Chao Yuan. Therefore, Wang Hao brought people directly to the tea house. The girl who betrayed them was very clever and didn't expose herself. The boss also didn't know who betrayed them. When he saw Wang Hao rushing to the tea house with his men, the owner was a little anxious and hurriedly made a call for help. Refund was a reasonable request, but taking people away was absolutely not. Otherwise, how could he continue to mingle on this street? Unfortunately, it was only 3 in the afternoon, so the thugs were still sleeping at home. After the boss vented his anger on the phone, he looked at the tea house not far away with worry. Most of the people who could open a shop in Hohai weren't easy to deal with. A strong dragon couldn't suppress a snake in its old haunts. Therefore, after Wang Hao fiercely threw the cigarette butt on the ground, he casually said to Chen Shi, "Are you the boss of this shop?" "Yes." "This has nothing to do with you. Just hand over that chow chow and we'll leave immediately. We won't hinder your business." After saying that, Wang Hao squinted his eyes and quietly looked at Chen Shi. If people who play rock have a wanton temperament, then people who play hip-hop are obviously their upgraded version. They always act like they are the boss and don't even put Mother Earth in their eyes. However, Chen Shi's answer was somewhat out of his expectations. He saw Chen Shi suddenly smiled and casually replied, "Chow chow? I don't know, there's no such person here. F***CK. Are you trying to scare us? Brother Hao, don't talk nonsense with him. Let's go in and search. Don't let that girl run away." "Yes, go in and search." Wang Hao didn't speak, he just looked up and down at Chen Shi. However, the group of young people behind him suddenly couldn't sit still. Chen Shi slowly glanced at the people in front of him. His expression didn't change. He stood quietly at the door of the tea house, as if he didn't intend to let Wang Hao and the others in. But at this moment, a young man who was originally standing at the back of the crowd suddenly moved. He suddenly turned around, picked up a fist-sized stone from the ground, and then directly smashed it toward the tea house's glass. Bang! The expected sound of glass breaking did not ring out. Chapter 140. Smashing the glass and injuring his own hand? This sudden turn of events shocked everyone present. It seems to be quite serious? Quickly take him to the doctor to stop the bleeding. Turn left on this street. There is a small clinic less than 200 meters away. Seeing that the young man's hand was bleeding profusely, Chun Shi reminded Wang Hao with a smile. After hearing Chun Shi's words, Wang Hao seemed to have finally come back to his senses. He hurriedly asked someone to take the injured person to the clinic to stop the bleeding. After the injured person left, the group of young people in front of him could not help but look at each other. They wanted to smash someone else's glass as a demonstration, but they did not expect to injure their own hand instead of breaking the glass. This was truly a great loss of face. Wang Hao coughed a little awkwardly, but immediately after, he said to Chen Shi with some annoyance, "Boss, I didn't bring so many brothers here today to stand here in the cold wind. You opened the door to do business, so you should know that it's better to avoid trouble. How about you let the girl come out and we'll part on good terms?" Chun Shi did not respond. Instead, he smiled and shook his head. "CNM, do you believe that we'll smash your broken tea house?" It was unknown who had suddenly said such a sentence. Hearing this, Chun Shi thought for a moment, then asked with some doubt, "Didn't we smash it just now?" As soon as these words came out, it was like a spark falling into a pile of gunpowder. The group of young people in front of him was instantly ignited by him. A few of the hot-tempered ones were about to rush up on the spot. Looking at their aggressive postures, it seemed like they were about to make a move. However, before Chun Shi could react, Wang Hao had already opened his arms and stopped them. Wang Hao was not stupid, and he was already past the age of fighting for personal feelings. Although he usually acted extremely arrogantly, in reality he was very measured in his actions. This was not a small county, but the capital of Wuxia, Shangjing. The water in Shangjing was very deep. If you casually threw a brick on the street, it could hit a big shot that they absolutely could not afford to offend. Wang Hao had come from a small county and had finally made a name for himself. So how could he do something as stupid as taking the lead to cause trouble? Even if they wanted to make a scene, they would only do so after he left. Just like wine stalls, every industry had its own rules of survival. Throwing stones and smashing glass was actually not a problem at all. Even if they rushed in and smashed things up, they would only need to pay some money in the end. Article 275 of the criminal law clearly stipulates that, in cases of intentional destruction of property, if the loss of public or private property exceeds 5,000 renminbi, the case shall be filed for prosecution. In other words, as long as the loss did not exceed 5,000 yuan, the police would not file a case. These days, hooligans were not scary. What was scary was that hooligans were cultured. Therefore, it was fine to smash the shop but not to beat people up. Now that there were so many people watching, if this person were to lie on the ground and insist that there was something wrong with his brain, then they would obviously have to spend a short holiday in the police station. However, Wang Hao's patience had been worn out by Chun Shi. After signaling them not to make a move, Wang Hao spat on the ground and said fiercely, "Go in and find him." After saying that, Wang Hao stared coldly at Chun Shi, as if warning Chun Shi not to blindly interfere. Following his order, the young people behind Wang Hao swarmed toward the door of the tea house. However, they were wrong. They did not make a move, but that did not mean that Chun Shi would not make a move. Chun Shi was too lazy to talk nonsense with them. If anyone dared to approach the door, he would kick them. Being a bartender was not a glorious profession. After figuring out the cause of the matter, Chun Shi wanted Chao Yuan to go out and give them an explanation. After all, it was Chao Yuan who was wrong first. But unfortunately, this group of young people were very stubborn. Under their superficial skin was an infinitely inflated heart. The group of people wanted to hang a sign on their faces as they walked, saying, "I am the most awesome. I am the best in the world." Their aggressive appearance also scared Nian Nian. Therefore, the side that was supposed to be in the right was particularly hateful in Chun Shi's eyes. The two young people who rushed at the front thought that Chun Shi did not dare to stop them, so they did not even look at Chun Shi and rushed toward the door. However, just as they were about to touch the door of the tea house, Chun Shi suddenly kicked them back. Chun Shi had a sense of propriety. He did not hurt them but made it impossible for them to get close to the door. Looking at the two brothers who were kicked back by Chun Shi, Wang Hao suddenly flew into a rage. TMD, you dare to make a move? Beat them to death. Since the other party had made a move, how could he tolerate it? Therefore, he led the charge. At this moment, the door behind Chun Shi suddenly opened. Stop! With a shout, Xiao Yuan hurriedly ran in front of Chun Shi, and then directly blocked him behind her. Xiao Yuan glanced at Wang Hao with slight fear in her eyes. After hesitating for a moment, she pretended to be calm and said, "This has nothing to do with Boss Chun. I am Xiao Xiao. If you have any problems, come at me." Xiao Yuan had been paying attention to the movement outside the door. When she heard that they were about to make a move, she could not help but rush out. Although Xiao Yuan did not understand why these people were looking for her, there was no doubt that this was caused by her, so she could not implicate others. Wang Hao stopped and looked at Xiao Yuan. He could not help but show a strange expression on his face. Xiao Yuan was not stupid. When she realized that the other party had brought a lot of people, she decisively called the police. Therefore, standing in front of Wang Hao, Xiao Yuan had some confidence. She held the phone and shook it in a circle. Then, Xiao Yuan continued to say to Wang Hao, "I'm warning you not to mess around. I just called the police. The police will be here soon." Hearing this, Wang Hao could not help but laugh. He casually mocked, "Call the police? What law did we break?" *TCH, let me tell you, it was a small matter, but now you've made a big deal out of it. Just you wait. After he finished speaking, he pointed at Xiao Yuan fiercely. Xiao Yuan was frightened by him. She could not help but take a small step back. But what was strange was that Wang Hao did not do anything. Instead, he brought his people directly to the opposite side of the street. Then they stood in a row against the railing. Xiao Yuan was a little confused. She could not help but turn to look at Chun Shi and ask, "What happened to them? Did you call the police?" "Ah, I called the police." "Then let's wait for the police to come." After he finished speaking, Chun Shi turned and returned to the tea house. Xiao Yuan looked back at Wang Hao and his people with some doubts. She realized that he was still staring at her fiercely, so she followed Chun Shi into the tea house in fear. Gangsters had a characteristic, which was that they bullied the weak and feared the strong. So when they heard that the police were coming, they immediately became obedient. But so what if the police came? Were they going to take them all back to the police station? In Wang Hao's words, that was Chapter 141. After hearing that Xiao Yuan had called the police, Wang Hao and his men dispersed. Gathering a crowd to make trouble? No, they just came to Ho-Hai to see the scenery. Xiao Yuan was still a little confused, but seeing that Wang Hao and his men hadn't left, she didn't dare to run around and could only obediently follow Chun Shi back to the tea house. After Chun Shi returned to the tea house, the guests at the two tables gave him a thumbs up and praised, "Boss, you're amazing, you're a real man." Not to mention who was right and who was wrong. Just Chun Shi blocking the entrance of the tea house by himself was enough to make them applaud and praise him. This boss was very competent. Qin Ruoying whispered to the little girl at the bar, making her giggle from time to time. After seeing that Chun Shi had returned, the little girl immediately rubbed against Qin Ruoying's arms and reached out for Chun Shi to carry her. After Chun Shi picked her up from Qin Ruoying's arms, the little girl asked sweetly, "Papa, what were you doing outside?" Papa was reasoning with them. "Why? Did they scare you?" Hearing this, the little girl immediately shook her head and pouted. "No, I don't like them." Children were sometimes very strange, and the first impression a stranger left on them was very important. If this person was someone they liked, then they would immediately be very kind to this person, as if they were familiar with him. But if this person wasn't someone they liked, then sorry, the child would stay as far away as possible. Unless their parents were around, they wouldn't get too close. The group of people outside was obviously not the little girl's favorite. She touched the little girl's little face and said with a smile, "This is our home. If you don't like them, then Papa won't let them in. Okay?" "Okay." The little girl happily acted coquettishly. At this time, Qiao Yuan slowly walked over. After hesitating for a moment, she said very embarrassedly, "Boss, I'm sorry for the trouble." After saying that, Qiao Yuan suddenly bowed to Chen Shi. Before Chen Shi could say anything, Qin Ruoying waved at her and smiled. "It's nothing. Why don't you come over and have a chat?" Hearing the lady boss's words, Qiao Yuan obediently sat beside her. "How long have you been in this business?" "Half a month." "How much did you earn?" Qiao Yuan was stunned for a moment. Then she said hesitantly, "If this order is included, it should be more than 20,000 yuan. However, the bill hasn't been paid yet." "Why do you want to do this? If I remember correctly, you are a student of Beijing Normal University, right?" Qing Bei is from Beijing Normal University, and Beijing Normal University is known as one of the 4 famous universities in Beijing. Can even be ranked in the top 20 in the country. Do you think it's appropriate for a student from Beijing Normal University to be a prostitute? Qin Ruoying's voice was very soft and gentle, but every word pierced Qiao Yuan's heart. Qiao Yuan lowered her head in silence. After a long while, her tears flowed down silently. Seeing that his wife was about to talk about life ideals with others, She held the little fellow and sat in the center of the lobby, leaving some private space for them. Qiao Yuan sobbed in a low voice. Qin Ruoying waited for a moment, then took out a few tissues and handed them to her. "Can you tell me why?" Qiao Yuan took the tissues and wiped her tears. After taking a deep breath, she looked at Qin Ruoying and said sadly, "My father is sick. He needs money. I've done a lot of work, but I can't make any money. Someone recommended me to work in a KTV. I was afraid, so I didn't go. But I really need money, so they recommended me to be a prostitute." Qiao Yuan's family was very ordinary. Her father was a middle school teacher, and her mother was an elementary school teacher. Their income was not high. They relied on her father's tuition classes to earn some extra money. Their family barely reached the standard of a well-off family. She was a very happy girl. Although her family was not rich, she did not have to worry about food and clothing. Her family was happy. She could be regarded as a pretty girl in a small family. Qiao Yuan also worked hard. She was the top liberal arts scholar in her county during the college entrance examination. However, sometimes the reality was more cliché than stories. After all, life was like an electrocardiogram. If it was smooth sailing, it meant that you were dead. 3 years ago, Qiao Yuan's father was diagnosed with chronic uremia. So there were only 2 paths left in front of them: lifelong dialysis or kidney transplant. The price of dialysis was not too expensive. The charge was slightly different in each place. The price of a single dialysis was about 400 yuan. A patient had to undergo dialysis at least 3 or 4 times a week, about 13 times a month. It cost 5,200 yuan, about 60,000 yuan a year. 60,000 yuan didn't sound like much. However, for an ordinary family in a small county, this was already a huge expense. Because of his health, Qiao Yuan's father was forced to close the tuition classes. However, he did not quit. Instead, he insisted on going to work every day. Qiao Yuan's father often said, Qiao, don't worry about family matters. Just study hard. When you graduate and find a good job, Dad can enjoy life." This illness was not life-threatening for a while, but it would put a lot of financial pressure on a family. So every time Qiao Yuan returned home, she would feel that her parents had aged a lot. It was also because of this that Qiao Yuan worked part-time while studying hard to earn scholarships since her freshman year. She had done many jobs, such as waitress, tutor, courier, and part-time model. Part-time model was the fastest way to earn money, but this kind of good thing was not common. In fact, she had the qualifications to become a contract model, But Qiao Yuan did not forget that she was still a student. So, she decisively refused. She wanted to give her father a kidney transplant, but it was a sky-high price. The kidney source started at 200,000 yuan, and the surgery cost 50,000 to 60,000 yuan. After the kidney transplant was successful, he would need to take anti-rejection drugs, which cost about 10,000 yuan a month. After half a year, she would have to pray that there would be no infection or rejection. Otherwise, the condition might worsen. Moreover, a kidney source was not easy to find. Although a kidney transplant might not be able to cure him, compared to lifelong dialysis, a kidney transplant was indeed the most ideal treatment. So, Qiao Yuan only wanted to save 300,000 yuan as soon as possible, in case a suitable kidney source appeared in the future, and she did not have the money to give her father a kidney transplant. Qiao Yuan was very thrifty. Even the clothes she was wearing were borrowed from her best friend. There were 38 cups of black tea in Chun Shi's tea house. If it were not for the fact that the bar saleswoman had to wait near the bar at all times, and sometimes she would wait for a whole day, she would not come in and sit down for a cup of tea. Being a bar saleswoman was indeed very profitable. In addition, she had some beauty. So, Qiao Yuan had successfully slaughtered a few fat sheep in just half a month. The money came so easily, but it also made Qiao Yuan feel a sense of guilt. So, she saved these people's phone numbers. She had already decided that when her father recovered from his illness, she would return the money to these people one by one and sincerely say, "Thank you." She really could not think of any other way, so, sorry. Qin Ruoying was a very qualified listener. She sat there and quietly listened to Qiao Yuan's story. After Qiao Yuan finished her story, Qiao Yuan could no longer hold it in. She suddenly lay on the bar counter and burst into tears. Perhaps she had been suppressed for too long, so the girl cried very sadly. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying gently put the tissue next to Qiao Yuan. Then, she looked at Chun Shi thoughtfully. Chun Shi saw this and nodded gently at her. With his 5 senses, he could easily determine whether the girl was lying or not. When Qiao Yuan was talking just now, Chun Shi was listening quietly by the side. So he was very sure that the girl was not lying. Chapter 142. After listening to Qiao Yuan's story for a few minutes, there was a burst of sirens on the street outside. The Ministry of Public Security's 110 Police Service Standardization Standards clearly stated that police personnel must respond quickly after receiving a police order. Any major threat to the personal and property safety of citizens. Emergency call for help. In the city, they must arrive at the scene within 5 minutes. In the suburbs, they must arrive at the scene within 10 minutes. This was a hard indicator, so don't make a false police report. Otherwise, you will be invited to drink tea for a few hours. Seeing that the police came, Chun Shi handed the little guy to Qin Ruoying, and he walked out with Qiao Yuan. The police car stopped in front of the tea house. The driver was a middle-aged policeman, and the policeman in the passenger seat was younger, about the same age as Wang Hao. At first glance, it was the standard of a civilian police and an auxiliary police. The middle-aged policeman was not polite. After glancing at Wang Hao and his group, he directly asked Chun Shi, "Did you call the police?" Chun Shi nodded. When he was about to explain the situation to the policeman, the middle-aged policeman pointed at Wang Hao and his group and asked, "Is it them?" Hearing this, Qiao Yuan suddenly acted like a class monitor reporting to the teacher. She quickly interrupted and said, "It's them. They just blocked the entrance of the tea house and caused trouble. They even smashed the window. Did they do anything? Did they suffer any losses?" Qiao Yuan was stunned for a moment. After glancing at the untouched window, she said with some difficulty, "They didn't do anything. It seems that there are no losses." "Okay, I got it." The middle-aged policeman nodded, then turned and walked directly across the street. This was a bar street, so there were often some drunk people causing trouble here. As a policeman in the area, he had seen too many, so he was not surprised by these situations. "Who's the leader?" As soon as the middle-aged policeman's voice fell, Wang Hao immediately replied with a smile, "There's no leader. Just a few friends gathering here, chatting and looking at the scenery of Hohai." Don't give me that. Hurry up and leave. Do what you need to do. The middle-aged policeman glared at him and waved his hand to let them leave. Seeing this, Wang Hao said with some dissatisfaction, "Hey officer, we didn't break the law, right? This is not Zongnanhai. Are we not allowed to hang out here?" "That's right. Isn't this Bar Street? We still have to wait for the night to drink," one of the lackeys casually added. But when he spoke, his eyes were looking at Ho Hai, as if he didn't dare to look at the middle-aged policeman. The middle-aged policeman was also a veteran. He naturally knew how to deal with this group of punks, so he immediately said to Wang Hao, "Take out your ID card." Wang Hao didn't seem to hear him clearly. The middle-aged policeman glanced at him, then suddenly saluted him. Then, he took out his ID and said seriously, "There have been many robberies around here. In order to ensure the safety of the people, I have the right to interrogate you. Please cooperate with the investigation. Otherwise, I have the right to forcibly summon you. If you have any objections, you can call 110 or 12,389 to complain. This is my police number. Please show me your ID card." Wang Hao was terrified when he saw that the middle-aged policeman seemed to have changed into a different person in an instant. Therefore, he quickly squeezed out a smile and saluted to the policeman. Then, he said with a cheeky smile, "Understood, right away. We'll leave right away." After that, he called his brothers and left. The middle-aged policeman saw that he was tactful, so he was satisfied and took back his ID. As a basic policeman, he was also considered to be a very responsible kind, so he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he was going to wait until Wang Hao and his group left. Under the gaze of the middle-aged policeman, Wang Hao had to reluctantly take his group to their car. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. So, before he left, he didn't forget to give Chun Shi a middle finger, and then slowly made a gesture of slitting his neck. Looking at his posture, he seemed to be silently telling Chun Shi that this matter wasn't over yet. The characteristics of hooligans, besides bullying the weak and fearing the strong, were also disgusting. If a business offended them, they wouldn't hurt them, but they would endlessly harass them, making it impossible for them to do business. Xiao Yuan also understood what Wang Hao wanted to express, so she quickly said to Chen Shi, "Boss, I'm sorry. I'll go and explain it to them." After that, she wanted to chase after Wang Hao and his group. This matter had to be resolved. Why not take advantage of the fact that the police were still here and have a good talk with Wang Hao? At most, she would just have to pay for it, however. Xiao Yuan had just taken 2 steps when Chen Shi suddenly pulled her back, then shook his head at her, indicating that she shouldn't go. It had to be said that Xiao Yuan really thought of this matter too simply. Wang Hao was obviously coming for her. Although she didn't know what they wanted to do, it was obviously not for money. There must be another purpose. Seeing that Xiao Yuan was still confused, Chen Shi sighed softly, "Don't go. I think they're not doing it for money, but for you as a person." "Me as a person? What do you mean?" "Boss, I don't understand." However, Chen Shi shook his head and didn't explain further. Seeing this, Xiao Yuan could only stand beside Chen Shi obediently. The boss had just saved her, so he shouldn't be a bad person. Listening to him should be the right thing to do. Wang Hao and his group drove 4 cars. They weren't luxury cars, but after the cars started, there was a rumbling sound. Obviously, they were modified cars, and the throttle was changed and the turbine was installed, so when the accelerator was stepped on, there was a deafening roar. As if to demonstrate, when Wang Hao drove past the door of the tea house, he deliberately stepped on the accelerator, making the noise even louder. Xiao Yuan couldn't help but cover her ears. The middle-aged policeman stood silently by the side, looking at Wang Hao and his group with a blank face. He was a policeman, not a traffic policeman, so he couldn't do anything about this kind of thing. Otherwise, he would have detained these bastards' cars. Wang Hao rolled down the window, spitting out a mouthful of saliva, then opened his mouth and silently said, F***CKU. Then he gave Chun Shi the middle finger again, changing gears, braking, and stepping on the accelerator. After a set of smooth operations, Wang Hao laughed wildly and sped up. The 4 modified cars roared and sped away in an instant. The middle-aged policeman shook his head, as if he was lamenting the degeneration of the world. However, at this moment, Chun Shi suddenly waved his arm. Then, Wang Hao's car slammed into the railing of Ho Hai. Bang! In order to send them on their way, Chun Shi even broke the railing. Therefore, when Wang Hao's car hit the railing immediately broke, and his car flew into Ho Hai. The skating rink in Ho Hai usually opened in January. Although some places were already frozen, it wasn't very thick. The car fell into the water, causing a huge splash. The middle-aged policeman was stunned by the scene in front of him. It wasn't until the car slowly sank into the water that he suddenly came back to his senses, and quickly called the auxiliary police to help him save people. It was just a small punishment and a big warning, not really taking their lives. Therefore, in order to prevent any accidents, Chun Shi had already considerately opened the car door for Wang Hao while he was still in the air. Chapter 143. This year was not a warm winter, but a cold winter. So in December, the water surface of Ho Hai had already condensed a thin layer of ice. Wang Hao's car was filled with 5 people. After the car drove into the water, the 5 people struggled to swim back to the shore. The other people on the shore hurriedly pulled them up. Looking at the people who were squeezing into the car, the middle-aged policeman couldn't help but sigh. Karma. Although tourists accidentally fell into Ho Hai from time to time, the middle-aged policeman had been in this area for so long, and he really hadn't heard of anyone who could drive a car into Ho Hai. The car was probably scrapped, and how to get it out had become a big problem. It was estimated that the Shikahai subdistrict community would seek compensation from them. This group of stinky brats was also unlucky. But this was no longer the middle-aged policeman's business, so he called the young policeman and prepared to leave. "Comrade, take care." After Chun Shi smiled and said hello to the middle-aged policeman, he took Xiao Yuan back to the tea house. As soon as they walked into the tea house, Qin Ruoying glanced at Chun Shi with a smile. She knew what happened outside, so she guessed that this must be Chun Shi's good deed. Young people don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. A little punishment is okay. After being disturbed by this group of bastards, the guests at the table who just left didn't even pay the bill. Now they didn't know where they went. After the couple cleaned up the teacups at their table, they returned to the bar with the little girl in their arms. Xiao Yuan stood in the lobby stupidly and looked at their calm appearance. For a while, she didn't know what to say. After a long time, Xiao Yuan came to the bar, bowed to the couple and said sincerely, "Boss, lady boss, thank you." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying said with a smile, "Give you a piece of advice. Don't do this in the future. This is not a glorious career. With your education, you should be able to find a very good job in the future. I hope you can distinguish the priorities and don't ruin your future." After hearing her words, Xiao Yuan fell silent. After hesitating for a while, she nodded lightly and said in a low voice with a complicated expression, "I understand. Thank you, lady boss." Qin Ruoying smiled and turned to look at Chun Shi. Chun Shi looked at his wife helplessly. Then, he grabbed a black pill from the plate of sunflower seeds in front of the big cat. The big cat was lying lazily on the bar counter. When it saw that one of its snacks was taken away, it immediately stuck its head out and let out a dissatisfied meow. Chun Shi stroked its head, then smiled at Xiao An and said, "This is a pill left behind by an old Chinese doctor. I heard that it's especially helpful for kidney diseases. You can take this pill back to your father and see if it has any effect. Don't worry, it's a pure Chinese medicine formula." Chapter 144. Twins. According to statistics, the average birth rate of twins in the world was 89:1. In other words, out of every 89 pregnant women, there would be one who would give birth to twins. Before the two-child policy was introduced, the number of births per day in Wuxia was around 20,800. If it was accurate to the second, then Wuxia would give birth to a baby every 15 seconds. Even with a 1% probability, Wuxia would give birth to 2,000 pairs of twins per day. After the two-child policy was introduced, this number would double. Twins were not a particularly rare existence. However, the little girl was too young, so when she saw two children who looked exactly the same, she was immediately frightened. After she obediently greeted her grandfather, the little girl immediately shrank behind Chen Shi, then carefully looked at the twins in front of her. The twins were both boys. They had delicate features and were very cute. Twins generally looked very similar because they were identical twins, so the genes they carried were almost the same. A small number of twins did not look alike, but that was because they were heterozygotic twins. If the mother laid 2 eggs and produced 2 fertilized eggs, then the genes they carried would naturally be different. When they grew up, there would be a clear difference. The twins did look very similar, and the children were still young, so even with Chen Shi's eyesight, he could only find a few subtle differences. Seeing that the little girl was a little scared, Chen Shi picked her up, then smiled at the old man and said, "The children look so similar. How do you usually tell them apart?" Hearing this, the old man laughed and said, "The older brother has a mole behind his earlobe, but the younger brother doesn't. But it's not obvious, so I made a mark on their clothes." After that, the old man asked the 2 children to turn around. Hearing their grandfather's words, the twins obediently turned around and lay on the sofa. At this time, Chen Shi realized that there were numbers written on the back of their clothes. On the left was 1 and on the right was 2. Didn't the 18th National Assembly propose to talk about civilization, so I named the children civilization. The left is the older brother, and the right is the younger brother, Xia Wen, Xia Ming. Civilization? Chen Shi pondered for a moment, then said to the little fellow with a smile, "Come on, Nian, introduce yourself to Grandpa." The little guy hugged Chen Shi's neck with one hand and tilted his head to look at the twins. After that, he quickly turned his head and buried his little head in Chen Shi's shoulder. Seeing her like an ostrich, Chen Shi could only say to the old man apologetically, "Sorry, the child is shy. It's okay. My 2 kids used to be afraid of strangers too. I've gotten used to bringing them out for a stroll." After chatting with the old man for a while, Chen Shi suddenly remembered his duty, so he quickly pointed to the price list on the table and said with a smile, "What do you want?" "Vegetarian tea. I have something to do later, so I'll leave after sitting for a while." "All right, please wait a moment." Chen Shi returned to the bar with the little fellow in his arms. Qin Ruoying also noticed the little fellow's strange behavior, so she quickly asked, "What's wrong?" She probably hasn't seen twins before, so she's scared. While talking, Chen Shi handed the little fellow to Qin Ruoying. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying had to take the little fellow from Chen Shi's hands, and then explain to her what twins were. At this time, Chen Shi made a cup of tea for the old man. The waiters were on strike, so only he, the boss, had to do it personally. The little fellow rarely dealt with people of the same age. Now there were 2 of them, and they looked exactly the same, so naturally she was scared. After listening to Qin Ruoying's explanation, the little fellow nodded as if he understood something. Tilting her head and thinking for a while, she suddenly pouted and asked, "Mommy, why don't I have a sister who looks exactly the same?" Qin Ruoying was amused by her, so she pinched the tip of her little nose and asked, "You want a sister?" And hearing this, the little fellow immediately nodded, then said with anticipation, "I want a sister. A sister can play with me." You only know how to play." In fact, Qin Ruoying had already guessed why she wanted a sister. It was because she was lonely, and there was no one of the same age to play with her. She and Chen Shi had no plans to have a second child for the time being, and distant water could not put out a nearby fire, so the best way now was to bring the little fellow out to interact with people of the same age. Thinking of this, Qin Ruoying carried the little fellow, then walked directly to the twins. Chen Shi placed the teacup in front of the old man, and was about to turn back to the bar when Qin Ruoying brought the little fellow over. The husband and wife had a tacit understanding, and Chen Shi understood her meaning without a word of explanation. Thus, after Chen Shi's introduction, the old man also understood the purpose of Qin Ruoying's visit. Every parent hoped that their children would be able to play with their peers because for children under the age of 6, This was something that would only be beneficial and not detrimental. Seeing that the old man agreed, Qin Ruoying did not stand on ceremony, and directly brought the little fellow to the twins, then smiled at the two children and asked, "Can you let your sister play with you?" After hearing her words, the older brother sitting on the left heard her, and without discussing with his younger brother, he immediately said, "Okay." Then, he looked at the old man and asked, "Grandpa, can we play marbles with our sister?" "Go, don't bully her." "No. We won't bully her, we want to protect her." The older brother jumped down from the sofa excitedly, patted his chest, and promised. He directly took the little fellow's hand, like a little adult, and said to the little fellow, "Sister, I'll play with you." "Me too." The younger brother seemed to be afraid that they would miss him, so he immediately squeezed from behind the older brother. Looking at the younger brother, it seemed that he also wanted to hold the little fellow. Thus, Qin Ruoying handed the little fellow's left hand to him. The two brothers were actually more than 2 months older than the little fellow. When the three of them stood together, they were half a head taller than the little fellow. The two brothers took Nian around the hall. After finding an open space in the corner, they immediately squatted on the ground and took out marbles from their pockets. The little fellow had not played with glass marbles yet. Therefore, when she saw the colorful glass marbles, she was immediately attracted by the glass ball with a strange pattern in the middle. The little fellow grabbed a marble and played with it. Seeing this, the older brother immediately said to her, "Sister, we'll teach you how to play." Okay. Children could always play together happily. Qin Ruoying stood beside the three little fellows with a smile, quietly watching them play marbles. The little fellow had not played with people of the same age for a long time, so in the beginning, she was a little reserved. But after playing for a while, the little fellow gradually let go of herself, and the range of her movements and laughter became louder and louder. Chapter 145. Playing marbles was actually a very fair competitive game, and it was very helpful for children to learn physics in the future. For example, when they learned about parabola, momentum, force, and other subjects, they could not help but think of playing marbles as a child. This also made it easier for children to understand the content of the teacher's lecture. The little girl had never played this kind of game in her life, so she was immediately excited. The twins were already veterans at this game. When they saw that their sister did not know how to play, they let her play. The little girl played 3 times, but they only played once. Qin Ruoying accompanied the children, and Chun Shi accompanied the old man to play Go. However, halfway through the game, the old man's phone suddenly rang. The old man took out his phone and looked at it. His face suddenly sank. After picking up the phone, the old man did not wait for the person on the other end of the phone to speak first. He said directly into the phone, "I'm here, don't rush me." After that, he seemed very impatient and hung up the phone. When Chun-Shi saw this, he smiled and asked, "Is there anything else?" Some family matters. I have to go. I lost this game. Let's come back another day." The old man shook his head and said, after a gentle sigh, he stood up reluctantly and asked casually, "How much is this tea? You've been sitting here for less than half an hour, and you haven't drunk much tea. You don't have to pay. This bill is on me." Since Chun-Shi said so, the old man didn't hold back. After thanking Chun-Shi, he told his 2 grandsons that it was time to leave. When the twins heard their grandfather's call, they were stunned for a moment. They could not help but mutter, "So fast?" They seemed to know that they had something to do later, so they reluctantly said to the little girl, "Sister, we have to go. We'll come back tomorrow to play with you." While talking, the 2 brothers also picked up the marbles on the ground. When the little girl saw this, her face was full of reluctance. However, there was no other way. They had to leave, so she had to silently help the 2 brothers pick up the marbles. "That green one is mine." When the younger brother saw that his marble was taken away, he was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He pounced and snatched the green marble back from his older brother's hand. The little fellow squatted on the ground and silently watched them pick their marbles. She had a pitiful look on her face, as if she was very reluctant to let the two brothers leave. The two brothers put away the marbles and stood up. At this time, the elder brother seemed to have noticed the little fellow's abnormality. He hesitated for a moment, but still chose something in his pocket. After a while, the elder brother took out 2 marbles from his pocket and handed them to the little girl. "Sister, these 2 are for you." The little guy was stunned for a moment. He raised his head and glanced at his brother before hesitantly taking the marble from his hand. "And mine, I'll give you 2 as well." The younger brother was never willing to fall behind his older brother. After seeing his older brother give the marbles to the little guy, he also quickly grabbed 2 marbles and stuffed them into the little guy's hands. However, after giving away the marbles, the younger brother regretted it. Because the 2 marbles that his older brother gave were carefully selected with the ugliest patterns, but he gave the 2 prettiest ones. Although he felt a little heartache, the younger brother was still a man after all. So he knew that since he had given it away, he couldn't go back on his words. Thus, he stood together with his older brother and waved goodbye to the little guy. "Goodbye, sister. I'll come and play with you in the future. And me, I'll come and play with you too." The 2 brothers fought to be the first to say goodbye to the little guy. Seeing this, the little girl also stood up and waved her small hand that was holding the marbles at them. "Goodbye." The twins left. The little guy stood on the spot and lowered his head to look at the marbles in his hands. No one knew what he was thinking about. Qin Ruoying waited quietly for a while before lightly walking over. He squatted beside the little guy and pulled him into his arms. "Nian, your brothers gave you something. Did you say thank you to them?" Hearing this, the little guy immediately used his little hands to hug Qin Ruoying's neck. After thinking for a while, she then asked in anticipation beside Qin Ruoying's ear, "Mama, when will my brothers come and play with me again?" Qin Ruoying smiled and didn't answer immediately. She carried the little guy to Chun Shi's side. She took the little guy and used his hand to scratch the tip of her little nose. He then smiled and said to her, "Your brothers will come again tomorrow and play with you again. Are you happy?" "Happy." Hearing Chun Shi's words, the little guy finally broke into a smile and happily played with the marbles. Seeing this, the husband and wife both laughed. Twins were really much more fortunate than only children. The next morning, the little guy seemed to still be thinking about the 2 little brothers who looked exactly the same yesterday. So just after drinking a mouthful of pumpkin porridge, she couldn't wait to shout that she wanted to go to the tea house. "Nian, don't be anxious. Finish your breakfast first. It's still early now. They won't come even if you go." Qin Ruoying served the little guy breakfast while Chun Shi tidied up the room. After the family of 3 finished breakfast and were about to leave for the tea house, the door of the east wing suddenly opened. Qin Xueqing actually went out. She had just walked out of the door when she saw the family of 3 standing on the steps of the west wing, staring straight at her. Stunned for a moment, Qin Xueqing asked awkwardly, "What's wrong?" "Oh, did the sun rise from the west today?" Chun Shi said as he pretended to look at the sky. Qin Xueqing heard him say this and suddenly felt a little embarrassed. During this period of time, she and Qin Yongyan hid in the room all day to cultivate. They didn't even eat on time. Luckily, Chun Shi left food for them every day. Cultivate, eat, and sleep. They only did these 3 things every day. They were simply lazy. Qin Ruoying knew his sister's character very well. He was afraid that Chun Shi's joke would make her angry again, so he asked with a smile, "Are you going out?" "Yes, I just received a call from the leader. There's something I need to deal with. Then be careful. If there's a problem, you can call us." Hearing this, Qin Xueqing couldn't help but look at Qin Ruoying, then quickly glanced at Chun Shi. Then, she nodded slightly hesitantly and said, "Okay. Then I'll go first. Go ahead." After Qin Xueqing quickly walked out of the courtyard, Chun Shi looked at Qin Ruoying with a half-smile. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying asked with a smile, "If Yueqing encounters any problems, as her brother-in-law, will you help?" Of course I'll help." After saying that, Chun Shi suddenly laughed. and then carried Qin Ruoying up by the waist. This sudden action immediately shocked Qin Ruoying. She quickly patted his arm and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Put me down. Let's go. Lady boss, let's open for business." She carried Qin Ruoying by the waist, Qin Ruoying carried the little fellow, and the little fellow carried the big cat. Chapter 146. The business of the tea-house was not good today, and there were no customers in the morning. The little fellow was lying on the bar, playing with the marbles that the brothers gave her. It was really boring to play marbles alone. After playing for a while, the little fellow felt a little bored, so she looked up and kept asking Chun-Shi when the two little brothers from yesterday would come. The old man just said that they would come, but Chun-Shi did not know when they would come. Seeing that the little fellow was about to explode, the couple thought about it, and simply took her to the corner yesterday, and then squatted on the ground to play marbles with her. For marbles, a family of 3. Seeing that her parents were willing to play with her, the little fellow immediately became happy. Playing marbles was actually very similar to playing billiards, and they both required certain skills. Chun-Shi playing marbles was no different from opening a plug-in. In order to let the little fellow play to her heart's content, he had to deliberately miss every time. The little fellow learned the professional posture that the twins taught her, and after a tireless effort, she finally hit Chun-Shi's marbles. "Papa! I won! I won!" After grabbing the marbles in front of Chun-Shi, the little fellow excitedly giggled at Chun-Shi. "Nian is so good. Do you still want to play?" "Yes." As if afraid that her father would not play with her, the little fellow quickly handed the marbles to Chun-Shi. Chun-Shi took the marbles, put them back on the ground, and then said to her with a smile, "Nian, Papa doesn't know how to play. You have to give in to Papa a little." "Okay, I will give in to Papa." The little fellow nodded again and again like a chicken pecking rice. But after restarting the game, her luck was off the charts, so she hit Chun-Shi's marble right away. "Oh Nian, you are getting better and better. Papa is so stupid. I won again." The couple squatted beside the little fellow, looking at their daughter's flushed face because of too much excitement. They could not help but reach out and pinch her little face. "Annoying. Papa is annoying. Mama is so annoying." The little fellow twisted her body to avoid the attack, which made Chun-Shi and Qin Ruoying laugh out loud. With the company of his parents, the boring morning passed quickly. The 3 of them had just finished lunch when the door of the tea-house was pushed open. The old man came as promised. Traveling with him was naturally the twin brother that the little fellow had been looking forward to for a long time. After the short interaction yesterday, the 3 little guys had cultivated a deep enough friendship. So when the 2 brothers walked into the tea-house, they immediately looked around for the little fellow. "Sister, we're here." After seeing the little fellow, the 2 brothers hurriedly ran out and surrounded her. Then, as if he was presenting a treasure, the elder brother took out a small car from his pocket and said to the little fellow, "Sister, look, I brought you something good." After he finished speaking, he laid on the ground and slowly pulled the trolley back. When he let go of his hand, the cart immediately moved forward. The little fellow had never played with this kind of toy before, so she immediately ran over and picked up the cart from the ground to study it. Seeing this, the younger brother grabbed the cart from the little fellow's hand and stuffed his kaleidoscope into the little fellow's hand. "Sister, look at this. This is fun." Seeing this, the elder brother immediately became unhappy. He quickly grabbed the cart back from his younger brother and said to him with dissatisfaction, "My cart is fun." As he spoke, he wanted to put the cart back into the little fellow's hand. Seeing this, the younger brother was not to be outdone and shouted to his elder brother, "The kaleidoscope is fun. The cart is fun. The kaleidoscope is fun." The little fellow held the kaleidoscope in one hand and the cart in the other. She foolishly watched the 2 brothers quarrel in front of her. Looking at the situation, if they were allowed to quarrel a few more words, they would probably fight. Qin Ruoying had no choice but to step forward to stop them, and then said to the little fellow, "Nian, don't you want to play marbles? Let your elder brothers play with you." With Qin Ruoying's mediation, the two brothers put down their dispute, squatted on the ground with the little fellow, and played the marbles that they didn't enjoy yesterday. After Chun Shi made a cup of tea for the old man, he played Go with him again. Because of the old man's face, Chun Shi held back a few moves, and finally lost by 3 pieces. The old man won with difficulty, but because of this, he stopped looking down on him. He just wanted to play casually before, but he didn't expect that the tea house owner was really a master at such a young age. He actually had to use all his strength to win by chance. The two of them chatted while playing Go. Through chatting, they learned that the old man's surname was Gu, and he was already 65 years old this year. He lived in Binhai Alley, which was less than 200 meters away from Dongming Alley. The twins' surname was Xia, but the old man's surname was Gu. Obviously, he was their grandfather. Chun Shi casually asked about the old man's family affairs, but he didn't expect the old man to shake his head after listening. He couldn't help but sigh, "Ah, I don't want to talk about these things." Seeing this, Chun Shi didn't ask more. The two of them continued to play Go. This game of Go was only interesting when the opponent was a match. If the opponent was too strong or too weak, it would be boring after 2 games. Chapter 147. Gu Lao was a retired man, and his only job now was to take care of his grandchildren. The two brothers seemed to be very well behaved now, but in fact they were much more naughty than Yin. If the two brothers stayed in one place for a long time, there would probably be footprints on the ceiling. No matter where they went, the two brothers were together, so they were much bolder than the average child. If it weren't for the little girl in the tea house, they probably wouldn't have been able to sit still and would have clamored to go out and play. Gu Lao was in good health, but taking care of these 2 naughty boys usually tired him out. Today, it was rare that the 2 brothers didn't bother him, so Gu Lao was naturally happy to be free. The 3 of them sat in the tea house for the whole afternoon. Chun Shi patiently played Go with the old man. He controlled his level very well, and after a few games, his record became 2 wins and 3 losses. Such a well-matched match also thoroughly aroused the old man's competitive spirit, and he became more and more focused when playing Go. For 20 in the afternoon, not long after the 6th game started, Chun Shi's phone suddenly rang. He took out his phone and found that the caller was Ning Chodong, who he hadn't contacted for a long time. Since Chun Shi hung up on Ning Zhonghua last time, the father and daughter of the Ning family didn't bother him again. Ning Chodong's sudden call probably meant that she needed his help with something again. After thinking for a while, Chun Shi smiled apologetically at Gu Lao, and then picked up the phone. "Hello, Mr. Chun? It's me, Ning Chodong." As soon as he picked up the phone, Chun Shi heard a little nervousness in Ning Chodong's tone. The reason why Ning Zhonggua's attitude was so bad when he talked to him last time was because he couldn't find any clues about Yingying at that time, which caused him to be in a bad mood. Now that he found his wife, and the family lived happily together, Chun Shi naturally returned to his previous harmless appearance. Come to think of it, the father and daughter of the Ning family had helped him a lot in the past, although most of it was a combination of interests. However, they were sensible and knew when to advance and retreat, so Chun Shi didn't mind continuing to maintain a relationship with them. Thus he smiled and asked, "It's me. What's the matter?" After confirming that Chun Shi was not very resistant to her, Ning Chodong immediately said excitedly, "Mr. Chun, can you save my father?" What happened to your father?" "He was kidnapped." "What happened?" "Dad didn't come home yesterday, and I couldn't get through to him on the phone. I thought he had something important to do, so I didn't look for him. I didn't expect to suddenly receive a call from the kidnappers this morning." "Did you call the police?" Chapter 149. Something had happened to Qin Shueqing, but it was Qin Yongyan who had called to inform them. In other words, Qin Shueqing was probably not out of danger yet. Qin Ruoying only had one sister. Although Qin Shueqing especially liked to compete with her when she was young, it was just a childish tantrum. It was obviously impossible to say that the two sisters had no feelings for each other. Qin Shueqing actually cared about her sister very much, just like how Qin Ruoying cared about her. It was just that she always appeared cold and aloof. Qin Ruoying was not very sure what would happen if she was shot in the arm by a sniper rifle. But Qin Yongyan had already said on the phone that one of Qinqing's hands was crippled. She was originally a martial arts fanatic. If one of her hands was really crippled, what kind of blow would it be to her? The more Qin Ruoying thought about it, the more afraid she became. She could not help but hold Chunxi's hand tightly, looking a little frightened. Seeing this, Chunxi gently hugged her into his arms and comforted her softly. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Qin Ruoying gently leaned her head on Chunxi's chest. After adjusting her emotions, she said softly, "Go and see Qinqing." "Okay." Chunxi nodded, then lowered his head and left a kiss on Qin Ruoying's lips. Perhaps because Chunxi was by her side, Qin Ruoying could not help but feel a little more relaxed after their lips parted. The couple turned their heads to the left side of the bar. The three little guys were sitting on the climbing mat, with a pile of Lego blocks in front of each of them. They were comparing whose block castle looked better. "Nian, Daddy has to go out for a while. I'll be back soon. Be good at home and listen to Mommy. Okay?" Chunxi's tone was full of negotiation because he was worried that the little guy would suddenly flip out, however. The little fellow's reaction was somewhat out of Chunxi's expectations. She looked up at Chunxi. After thinking for a while, the little girl suddenly grinned and said, "Goodbye, Papa. I'll wait for you at home." As she spoke, she waved her hand at Chunxi. At this moment, the twins waved at Chunxi and shouted, "Goodbye, Uncle." Seeing this, Chunxi was stunned for a moment. Then he patted the heads of the three little guys one by one. The little fellow suddenly stopped clinging to him. It probably had something to do with these two brothers. Chunxi didn't know that the two brothers were brought up by Gu Lao. Their parents were very busy with work, so they rarely accompanied them when they were young. After the brothers explained their situation to the little fellow finally understood how happy she was now. Therefore, when Chunxi proposed to go out, Nian was very generous, because she now understood that adults need to go out to work, so they can't be with their children all day. The little fellow was very generous, which relieved Chunxi of his worries. "Are you trying to mock me? Or are you pitying me?" She sat up and roared at Chunxi, but there was still a trace of tears on her face that hadn't dried yet. Chunxi didn't say anything. The two of them looked at each other silently. Qin Shueqing didn't see sarcasm or pity in Chunxi's eyes, but calmness. It was as calm as a lake deep in the mountains, without any emotion. Chunxi saw despair and pain in Qin Shueqing's eyes. This broken arm made her finally understand what despair was. After a long time, Chunxi finally broke the silence. Chapter 151. Kill? Qin Shueqing was stunned. Suddenly, she remembered the scene she saw in the village. It was this harmless-looking man in front of her who used frost and snow as a sword and killed the legend of the village. Was he here to support her? Qin Shueqing stared blankly at Chunxi. There were still traces of tears in the corners of her eyes. That pitiful look on her face made her look like a little woman who had just broken up with her boyfriend and was currently feeling extremely sad. Her weeping beauty and pitiful appearance gave Chunxi a headache. After a slight cough, Chunxi said in a low voice, "Let's go. I will avenge you." Qin Shueqing did not speak. She was stunned for a moment. Then, she suddenly curled up her legs. She sat on the bed and hugged her legs with her left hand. Then, she lowered her head and pressed it tightly against her knees. Qin Xueqing gritted her teeth and tried not to cry. However, She's five senses detected the slight trembling of her shoulders and the faint sound of her sobbing. The blow of losing an arm was too heavy for a woman like her who had always been confident and conceited. Blowing the mud up to the clouds, raising the flesh and bones of the dead. In this sentence, the words raise and flesh were both methods of using. If translated in plain language, it should be making the dead stand up, making the bones grow flesh. Coming back from the dead, and making the bones grow flesh. This was the method of immortals. Wasn't it just a broken arm? Even if she was broken into two pieces, she had a way to put her back together. However, after careful consideration, she did not intend to tell Qin Xueqing that he had a way to save her now, because his character was indeed flawed. As the saying goes, kindness is like water. Those who are too strong break easily, and those who are soft will never be defeated. Misfortune may be a blessing in disguise, and a blessing may be a curse in disguise. With the experience of losing her hand this time, it was not necessarily a bad thing to let this proud daughter of heaven have a taste of bitterness and temper her. Qin Xueqing hugged her legs in pain silently. She was not in a hurry. He just stood silently by the bed and looked at her. After a while, Qin Xueqing gradually calmed down. She rested her head on her knees and carelessly rubbed it twice. Only then did she raise her head and look at Chun-Shi with red eyes. She asked, "Did Big Sister tell you to come?" This woman's logical thinking seemed to be jumping around a bit. Chun-Shi did not expect that she would ask such a question after crying for a while. Why did it sound like she was treating him as an outsider? If he asked himself honestly, he should have done a good job as a brother-in-law. After pondering for a moment, Chun-Shi nodded and said softly, "Uncle Qin and Ying are very worried about you, so I came to check on you first. What about you?" Chun-Shi did not understand what she wanted to say, but at this time, Qin Xueqing had already turned her head and looked to the other side. She glanced at the closet next to her and then directly walked out of the bed. "You go out first. I want to change my clothes." "Okay. I'll wait for you outside." Seeing that she seemed to be much better, Chun-Shi did not waste any more time and directly walked out of the ward. Outside the ward, those people were still blocking the door and eavesdropping. When they saw Chun-Shi coming over, they scattered like birds and beasts. Chun-Shi opened the door. Those people were already sitting or standing in positions. There were a total of 4 men and 1 woman here. They were all Qin Xueqing's subordinates. What did Qin Xueqing do? She was a direct subordinate of the Wu Lian headquarters in Shangjing. She was the director of the Emergency Operations Management Office for special events. She was a section chief, so everyone called her Section Chief Qin. The Wu Lian was an administrative unit, so naturally, it used the administrative rank. Her position as a section chief did not seem high, but she had special rights. One of them was that it was not illegal to kill people. When the Wu Lian's department was on a mission in another country, they had the right to request the local police to cooperate with the operation. If the situation was special, they could even apply to the higher-ups for local armed police and military support. Qin Xueqing's Emergency Management Office had 10 action teams under its jurisdiction. With Shangjing as the center, they were responsible for combating all martial artist-related criminal activities in North China. This time, the reason why she came to Spring City was because of the special mission. It was a group of martial artists who illegally came from Nanyang. They planned a shocking kidnapping in Zhonghai, which shocked the entire international Wu Lian. Their timing was very clever. After most of the people in the Zhonghai branch were transferred to Jinling for another mission, they began the operation and directly kidnapped 2 well-known business moguls in Zhonghai. The social impact of this operation was too great. The Zhonghai branch did not have enough time to transfer people from Jinling, so they had to send an emergency request to the headquarters. After the headquarters in Shangjing received the request, they immediately sent out reinforcements. Qin Xueqing was one of the main people in charge of this rescue mission. After they set off from Shangjing and arrived in Zhonghai, they found that the group of Nanyang people had already gone deep into the hinterland of Wuxia. This group of people was also very brave. After they knew that the military would take over the sea and the air defense, they simply chose to travel by land. They crossed East China, Central China, and South China, planning to return to Nanyang from Guizhou. They had hostages in their hands. Chapter 152. The atmosphere outside the ward was a little awkward. Lao Sen leaned against the wall and squatted on the ground. No one knew what he was thinking about. The others were curiously sizing up Chen Shi. Qin Xueqing had already woken up. It was not hard to tell from her reaction that this man was indeed related to her, so they could not be rude to him. Moreover, they dared not be rude to an Alcade grandmaster. These people all had the usual arrogance of a martial artist. Perhaps it was because they rarely interacted with others, so although they felt a little awkward, none of them thought of standing up to talk to Chen Shi to ease the atmosphere a little. Seeing this, Chen Shi did not stay any longer. He turned and walked toward the elevator. Chen Shi didn't stop until she reached the corridor window directly across from the elevator. The sun was shining brightly outside the window. Even though he was a few streets away, he could still vaguely see the sparkling Dianxi Lake. Spring City was a second-tier city. In order to proactively develop, various policies had been tilted and construction sites were everywhere in the city. The city sped up its development, but it also lost some of its inexplicable charm. Qin Xueqing moved quickly. In less than 2 minutes, she had changed and walked out. Qin Xueqing was dressed casually. She wore a white knitted sweater under a brown windbreaker, and a pair of light blue slim-fit jeans that showed off her perfect legs. She did not wear high heels. Instead, she wore a pair of white sneakers. Therefore, she looked like a little girl who had just graduated from university. When they saw Qin Xueqing walk out of the ward, they quickly surrounded her. "Section Chief, where are you going?" Hearing this, Qin Xueqing forced a smile and told them, "Wait for me here. I'll be back soon." "No, the doctor said that you need to rest more." "That's right. You've just recovered from a serious illness. You should rest more." "Why are you going out? To buy things? Then we can run errands. Since we've already failed the quest, why don't we just relax in Spring City? The environment here is great, and it'll be good for your recovery." Although they were older than Qin Xueqing, they seemed to respect her as their leader. Seeing this, Qin Xueqing could only frown slightly, and then put on his official airs. "All right, you guys wait for me here. I'm going out with my brother-in-law. If the leader asks about me, just tell him that I'm still unconscious. That's all. I'll be back soon." After that, Qin Xueqing turned around and walked towards Chen Shi. Since the leader had spoken, the few of them had no choice but to shut their mouths. So, they just foolishly watched her walk into the elevator with Chen Shi. In the elevator, Qin Xueqing briefly explained the situation to Chen Shi. After hearing this, Chen Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Zhonghai Tycoon? Nanyang people." Chapter 153. Wunshan County in Dianzhou was a very strange place. It was adjacent to North Vietnam, and the border smuggling industry had even formed a complete industrial chain. Each smuggler was 50 yuan, and the guide fee was 100 yuan. If they needed to apply for a visa, it was 200 yuan. Of course, this was without bargaining. After the smugglers paid the protection fee, they could even seek the protection of the local gangsters. If anything happened, they would come forward to solve it because the other party also had to build a brand reputation. Today, everything in Wunshan was in order. Therefore, many people didn't know what had happened here. More than 20 years ago, a major incident happened in Wunshan County's Pingyuan town. It could be said to be the largest anti-drug operation since the founding of the country. Compared to this incident, the incident in Yuezhou's Lufingbo Shi village paled in comparison. As for people like Dongbei's fourth master Qiao, Liaodong's Lu Yong, Shanqing's Wenchang, and Chengdu's Lu Han. They couldn't be compared at all. The former was a gangster who could show off with a pistol, while the latter was a drug lord who had his head tied to his belt and could explode with a grenade at any time. After the anti-drug operation in Pingyuan, Wanshan became what it was today. However, it had always been the focus of the country's attention. The drug dealers weren't stupid. After the anti-drug operation ended, they had already moved to Maoping village, which was more than 100 kilometers south of Wanshan and only 2 kilometers away from the border. They usually lived in Maoping, and when they needed to work, they would smuggle to North Vietnam. They were born and raised in the local area. Every forest and every hillside couldn't be more familiar. This section of the border had no natural barriers. As long as they passed the boundary marker, they would be considered to have left the country. The border guards were also people. If they hadn't received the news in advance or happened to run into them, there was basically no way to stop these people. After leaving the country, they had no right to catch them. After returning to the country, they immediately became honest citizens. They also had no right to catch them. Qin Xueqing was ambushed about 2 to 3 kilometers west of Maoping village. After the Wu Lian's investigation, they had already determined that the spy for the Nanyang people was an old drug dealer in Maoping village, Poison Dog. Poison Dog was his nickname more than 20 years ago. After Ping Yuan was swept away, Poison Dog changed his name to Old Dog and hid in Maoping village. He was the type of person who didn't have much courage and was usually very cautious. He knew that he was in the business of killing people, so he never hid or transported the drugs himself. He had always let his subordinates do it. Although his reputation was great, his business was very small and his path was very stable. Chapter 154. Nanyang did not seem big, but it was one of the more densely populated areas in the world. There were many immigrants here, and because it was once a colony, the locals had many different beliefs, such as Buddhism, Catholicism, Christianity, and Judaism. Among them, most of them believed in Buddhism. Unlike Wuxia's Mahayana Buddhism, Hinayana Buddhism was more popular in Nanyang. The difference between the two was that Mahayana Buddhism promoted the salvation of others and oneself, while Hinayana Buddhism promoted self-indulgence. If one had to describe it, one could say that one was a bus while the other was a motorcycle. Hinayana Buddhism was a derogatory term for Mahayana Buddhism. In fact, Hinayana Buddhism's followers did not agree with this term. They called themselves Southern Theravada Buddhism. The Nanyang region mainly believed in Hinayana Buddhism, so the temples were very different from those in Wuxia. Wuxia's temples were mostly palatial, majestic, and solemn. Nanyang's temples, on the other hand, were mostly standalone. They were relatively small, with a Buddhist hall and a Buddhist pagoda, surrounded by scattered monks' residences or places for rest and study. Mahayana Buddhism's temples had many statues of Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and all kinds of protectors. However, Hinayana Buddhism's temples only had one statue. Shanluo was too poor, so most of the villagers here wore coarse linen clothes. Therefore, when a young woman like Qin Xueqing appeared in a trench coat and jeans, she immediately attracted a lot of attention. Nanyang was tropical and had a tropical monsoon climate. Most of the people here had light brown, or even dark brown skin. Qin Xueqing's skin was fair and beautiful. Compared to them, she immediately looked like a fairy who had descended from the heavens. After hearing Old Dog say that this was where the Nanyang people were hiding, Qin Xueqing immediately walked towards the temple. Her sister-in-law seemed to have a bad temper and was not easy to get along with, but in fact, she had never even killed a chicken before. Although she had a license to kill, she had always controlled herself when she was on missions. Once the enemy lost the ability to resist, she would immediately stop. However, being friendly to others did not mean that others would be friendly to her. That shot had completely angered Qin Xueqing. As a result, her wound had not even healed, and she was still in an extremely weak state. When she heard that she was going to avenge her, she immediately followed him. If she was not as skilled as him, it would be fine. However, the other party arranged for a sniper to ambush and almost take her life. Although her life was saved, her right hand. So she had to take revenge. After seeing Qin Wanqing get out of the car and leave, she also opened the door for her. Before leaving, she smiled and said to the old dog, "Let me give you a piece of advice. After being stunned for a moment, the monk was frightened by the scene in front of him. He ran toward the back of the temple. She looked at the back of the monk and did not choose to stop him. Instead, he went behind Qin Shueqing and asked casually, "Are you sure that he can understand Chinese?" Qin Shueqing could not help but be angry when she heard this. She was completely angry now, so she did not care about anything else. Her left hand tightened again, and the dark and thin man immediately rolled his eyes. "Speak. Where is the Wuxia that you kidnapped?" "That's enough. He is about to be strangled to death." She was speechless. He patted her shoulder. Then, she walked to the dark skinny man's side and took the gun from his hand. Bang! 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 The crisp sound of a gunshot rang out in the main hall, startling a flock of birds. The peace of the small village was broken by the sudden gunshot. The moment the villagers heard the gunshot, they all ran back to their homes. In a short while, there was not a single person on the dirt road in the village. "What are you doing?" After the gunshot rang out, Qin Shueqing immediately let go of her hand. The dark and thin man fell to the ground and wailed in pain. She fired 3 shots. One was aimed at the sky, while the other 2 were aimed at the dark and thin man's thighs. She looked at Shi in surprise. Shi smiled and played with the gun in his hand. This was an M1911, 45 caliber. There were many scratches on the gun, and it looked a little old. It was probably an antique left behind from the Vietnam War. Her sister-in-law was a civil servant, so no matter how angry she was still bound by the rules of a civil servant. Therefore, when she fired the gun, her sister-in-law seemed to be unable to accept it. That was because she had not changed her mind. This was not Wuxia. The person in front of her was not a kind person. This was a drug lord, a level higher than a drug dealer. Drug dealers could also be forced to take the risk to engage in this line of work. However, drug lords were the source of all evil. For the sake of profit, they had sold their souls to the devil. Qin Shueqing instinctively wanted to be merciful. However, she had never thought about what kind of experience it would be if she fell into their hands. The drug production in Nanyang accounted for almost 70% of the world's drug production. Thinking about those anti-narcotics police officers who died in the battle, it would not be enough to drag this group of crazy drug lords out and shoot them 10,000 times. Talking about humanity with them? First of all, they had to have humanity. She handed the gun to Qin Shueqing, then patted her shoulder as encouragement. "Okay, you're here to find trouble, not to drink and chat with them. Instead of letting you find them, let them find you." Chapter 155. Play the Eru with full health, then fight the boss with low health. First the small ones, then the big ones, and finally the boss. That was a scene only seen in movies and TV shows. Instead of fighting the small monsters all the way, she preferred to ask, "Who else?" Qin Shueqing seemed to be in a daze. She smiled and did not explain further. After about a minute, there was a rush of footsteps from the back of the hall. The 2 turned around and saw a group of Nanyang people with various weapons suddenly rushing into the hall. There were at least 15 or 16 people in front of them. Most of the people here could be said to be short and vigorous. Some were holding pistols, some were holding submachine guns, and some were even holding AK-47s. There were 2 old pagoda trees in front of the temple. They were estimated to have lived for hundreds of years. The lush leaves blocked most of the sunlight and made the hall look a little dim. There were 3 categories of countries in the world: developed countries, developing China, and least developed countries. Vietnam was originally at the bottom of the list, But the economic situation had improved significantly in recent years, so it jumped from the least developed country to developing China. Although it became developing China, there was a clear difference between Vietnam and Wuxia. Vietnam today was equivalent to Wuxia in the 80s and 90s. It was a critical time to go from chaos to order. Vietnam banned guns, but because there was a long anti-colonial struggle in this place, there were a lot of weapons. Although the Vietnam government tried to confiscate them, the effect was limited. Most of the guns smuggled in Wuxia came from this place. Since they were smuggling arms, it was easy to guess the firearms in the hands of the drug lords. The existence of drug lords, who were anti-human, was a cancer to society. It was not that Chun Shi was exaggerating, but if he pulled out all of these people and shot them, it was impossible to kill by mistake. Chun Shi's marksmanship was very good, and the previous 2 shots were penetrating wounds. The bullets did not hit the bone or artery, but went directly through the thigh. Penetrating wounds were easy to treat, but the prerequisite was that the bleeding had to be stopped in time. Otherwise, excessive blood loss would lead to shock or even death. The group of people swarmed into the hall like a swarm of bees. After glancing at their companions who were still wailing on the ground, they all pointed their guns at Chun Shi and Qin Shueching. However, what made Chun Shi a little surprised was that among this group of Nanyang people, there was clearly a foreigner with a different style. Chinese and Nanyang people still had obvious differences in appearance, so they could be distinguished at a glance. The Chinese man didn't carry any weapons, but from his position, it wasn't hard to tell that he held a high position among the Nanyang people. "What are you two doing here?" He looked to be in his 30s. His skin was yellowish, but he did not have the tan that was commonly seen on Nanyang people. His companion on the ground was still wailing and bleeding, but he chose to ignore it. Instead, he looked at Qin Shueching with interest. 2 long legs stretched tight by a pair of slim jeans, a perky chest under a white knitted sweater, fair and tender skin, and exquisite facial features that seemed to be made by nature. They were used to seeing rural women in the small valleys of Nanyang. Suddenly, such a stunning beauty popped up. These people really wanted to stare their eyes out. Qin Shueching had never been pointed at by so many people in her life, so she subconsciously frowned. No matter how powerful a martial arts master was, he was still a mortal. No matter how fast he was, he couldn't outrun bullets. No matter how strong his muscles were, he couldn't withstand a round of bullets. She had always been the one leading people with guns. Now that her position had changed, she was really not used to it. Was she afraid? She wasn't afraid that it was fake. However, when she thought of her cheap brother-in-law behind her, Qin Shueching suddenly became very confident. International Wu Lian Headquarters Emergency Management Office in Beijing. We're here today to look for 2 kidnapped Wuxia people. We hope that you will cooperate with the investigation. The Chinese man was stunned for a moment. Then, he used Nanyang language to translate Qin Shueching's words. Just as he finished translating, his companions beside him started laughing out loud. This Chinese man was Bai Rongqing. His grandfather immigrated to Nanyang and his family never left. There were many Chinese in Nanyang. They were the largest group of Chinese overseas and were also the most economically successful group. If the Jews controlled the economy of the United States, then the Chinese in Nanyang controlled the entire economy of Nanyang. Of course, this was a slightly exaggerated statement, but it was very intuitive. The Chinese in Nanyang were intelligent, hardworking, and thrifty. After they established themselves in Nanyang, they immediately worked hard to improve their social status. Bai Rongqing's father was not satisfied with the status quo, so he started the drug business. They could be considered drug lords, but they could also be considered not, because they were just middlemen who were responsible for pulling strings. For example, after a boss of a gang in Hong Kong was killed or arrested, the first thing the new boss would do was to visit the middleman in Nanyang. Production and sales were important links that could not be separated. The big drug lords were closely watched by Interpol and generally did not leave their territory easily. At this time, the middlemen needed to step in. In recent years, many countries around the world had increased their efforts to crack down on drug trafficking, But the global drug trade did not decrease. Instead, it increased by more and more. Why? It was all because of the middlemen. They could be said to be omnipresent middlemen. Money or guns. Choose one. Either cooperate or your whole family dies. The group of people led by Rongqing spoke in English. Qin Xueqing could not understand. However, how could she not understand their wretched expressions and obscene actions? Her sister-in-law was so angry that her face turned red. However, the black barrel in front of her made her quite wary. Seeing this, she took a step forward. The hall was filled with laughter, and the atmosphere seemed relaxed. However, in reality, the two sides were at daggers drawn. After she took a step forward, Rongqing's face suddenly froze. His companions next to him also pointed their guns at Shi. Then, Shi suddenly opened his arms. Then, he leaned forward slightly and pressed both of his arms forward. The true essence around his body suddenly erupted like a tsunami, surging and surging violently. There was no sound, only a series of exclamations. This group of armed thugs was like a bowling ball that had been knocked over. They were instantly thrown off their feet. However, their reaction was also extremely fast, although they were dizzy and their blood was surging. After this group of thugs fell to the ground, their first reaction was not to get up, but to lie on the ground, raise their guns, and pull the trigger. Da-da-da. There was a series of fierce gunshots in the hall. The bullets swept the wooden door, and suddenly a cloud of wood chips exploded. Old Dog was sitting in the off-road vehicle. He could hear the fierce gunshots coming from the temple from afar. With his experience, he could even tell which model the gunshots belonged to. Sigh, they're asking for it. After sighing pretentiously, Old Dog leisurely lit a cigarette, intending to finish it before setting off. The gunshots sounded for about half a minute. Then, the gunshots stopped abruptly. In the temple, Rongqing sat on the ground, looking at everything in front of him in a daze. The originally solemn Buddhist hall had been dyed a different shade of crimson by the fresh blood. The wooden floor was also covered in blood. Other than the blood stains on the walls and doorposts, there was also some minced meat stuck to them. The minced meat and fresh blood mixed together, constantly emitting a strong fishy smell. This purgatory-like scene made Qin Xueqing very uncomfortable. She quickly covered her mouth and ran out of the temple. The blood had already dyed Rongqing red, but there was not a single wound on his body. What happened just now? Rongqing's mind was a mess. Blood flowed down from the corner of his eyes, and his ears were buzzing. He only remembered. The young man in front of him suddenly waved his arms. Then his men opened fire. But the target of their shots, it was not the young man in front of him, but the teammates next to him. More than 10 people suddenly picked up guns and shot at each other, resulting in this scene of purgatory on earth. She calmly looked at Rongqing and suddenly asked, "Can we have a good chat now?" After hearing his voice, Rongqing could not help but tremble. You're tuning in to the Legend of the Vagabond YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.